Luke Patterson's world shatters when his wife Whitney drops a bombshell. She's in love with another man. In the dim light of their garage, she confesses, igniting a firestorm of betrayal. Desperate, Luke confronts her, but the trust is gone. A lawyer is called. Custody of their son, Kyle, hangs in the balance. As Whitney begs for forgiveness, Luke makes a cold, final decision. Love, betrayal, and a family torn apart. My right hip hurt a lot as soon as I woke up. "Bad weather is coming," Whitney mumbled. Her sleepy eyes followed me as I limped to the bathroom. I just grunted back. Days like this always felt tough. Most people were excited about spring, but not me. Spring meant cold and wet weather, and my old hip injury would bother me for 2 months or more. I couldn't stop thinking about the scary moments that had caused my hip pain. After using the bathroom, I looked at myself in the mirror while washing my hands. The face looking back wasn't too bad. Sure, I had sagging skin and a couple of chins like many of my friends. My gray eyes looked tired, marked with a few lines. My hair was short and starting to turn gray, and I could see the softness in my chest that showed I was feeling the effects of getting older. Still, I was just 7 pounds heavier than I was when I graduated. My body was doing okay, as well as it could. Everything was fine except for that annoying hip pain and the memories that came back at the worst times. "Are you okay?" Whitney asked sleepily, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah," I replied, noticing her stretch her small body behind me. On any other day in a different mood, I might have had different thoughts. There she was with her messy brown hair and her tiny body only covered by an old t-shirt and some comfortable shorts. I knew she had a strong spirit and a love for life that was hard to match. "It's your hip, right?" she said, as she nudged me aside to grab her toothbrush and toothpaste. "It's going to rain today," I replied. "That dream was bad," I added. "You were moving around a lot last night," she said while brushing her teeth. I picked up my toothbrush to join her in our morning routine. After we finished, Whitney went to take a shower while I shaved. Once I was done, I splashed cold water on my face and walked down the hall to wake up Kyle and get him ready for the day. In about 15 minutes, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, while Kyle enjoyed his cereal and a piece of toast. "I got my second-grade homework," Kyle said with his mouth full. "Don't talk with your mouth full," I said, lowering the newspaper. Once he finished chewing, he said, "I asked Miss Palmer about it." I asked him, "So what's the deal with Miss Palmer?" "She's nice," he replied. "Kind of old, though." I tried not to smile. For a 7-year-old, his idea of old was funny. He thought I was old, too. He frowned and said, "Not that old. More like Mom." "I won't tell her you said that," I replied. "Why not?" he asked. "It's not nice to say women are old. It's not nice to say someone is old, especially women. Why?" I shrugged. "It's just one of those life puzzles, I guess." "What puzzles?" Whitney asked as she walked into the kitchen, buttoning her blouse. She looked neat and ready for her day, dressed in a white shirt and a gray skirt and jacket. She was prepared to help the people of Lincoln County from troublemakers. "Nothing," I replied. "Dad told me not to call people old even if they really are." "That's true," she laughed, pouring herself some coffee. "Did you call your dad old?" "No, he just said that," ignoring my gesture to keep quiet. "I said you were old." She laughed loudly at that. "So, you're not upset I said it?" I pressed. "Your dad is right," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting down with us. "It's not polite." Kyle didn't say anything. He chose to finish his cereal quietly. "He has a homework project," I mentioned. Whitney raised her eyebrows, sipping her coffee. "Miss Palmer," I added. Maggie nodded. "Right, Kristen Palmer. She started teaching about 4 or 5 years ago." "How is she? Old like you?" I grinned. "We graduated together," she replied. "From high school? She got her degree pretty quickly. I think she didn't start teaching again until after she came back up here and got divorced. Same age?" "Yep." "So, is she a good teacher?" Whitney shrugged. "Not sure. She was popular in school, you know, prom queen, head cheerleader. We didn't hang out much. She was busy with her social life and didn't study as much." "Were you jealous?" I teased. "Not anymore," she replied. "Meaning Tyler Collins?" "Yes," she said with a nod. "She lives out on Twin Oaks Road." "Her ex-husband, the first one." "The second one was a cop from around here, so no, I'm not jealous." But she's a good teacher, right? I asked. Not really sure, Whitney said, putting her cup down and glancing at her watch. Can you hurry up? I need to get to the office. I have last-minute work for a hearing today. Hearing for what? The lab, drug case, she answered, showing she was getting impatient. It's about suppressing the evidence. I nodded and stood up, putting my coffee mug in the sink. I headed to hop in the shower and finish getting ready so Whitney could leave for the state's attorney's office. After, I would finish getting Kyle ready for school, drop him off, and then go to my history class at Chadwick College. Just another morning in the Patterson home. As I drove to Chadwick, something was bothering me. It was Whitney. Her moods had changed. She had been more impatient and quiet, often looking like she wanted to say something but then staying silent. Something was troubling her, and it was more than just usual work stress. I heard this as I parked in the faculty lot and picked up my briefcase. The time on my watch showed I was 20 minutes early, just like always. Old habits are hard to break. It was almost 7:30 when Whitney walked through the door. "Have you guys eaten yet?" she asked, hanging her coat in the closet before turning to me. "I fed Kyle," I replied, saving my spot in the big book about the Punic Wars, then putting it aside to greet her. "He's in his room doing homework. I decided to wait for you." She offered a tired smile. "You didn't have to do that." "You must be starving," I said. "You too," she answered with a shrug. Her face showed she was worn out, a mix of being stressed and exhausted. "Everything okay?" I asked, pulling her into a hug. "You seem a bit distant lately. Is something bothering you?" She quietly mumbled something into my shoulder, then hugged me tighter. This had been her response for the past month. She just wouldn't talk. "Do you want to discuss it over dinner?" I suggested. She pulled back from the hug. "It's nothing, babe. You know, work. Same stuff, different day. I guess it's all a bit much right now." Her face showed more than her words. It seemed she wanted to talk but was holding back. "How did the hearing go today?" I asked. Her confused look quickly changed to recognition. "The hearing? Yeah. It got pushed back for another 3 weeks. Just more of the same." My eyes narrowed and she tried to smile, but I could tell something was off. Welcome to life with the roses. I didn't say anything, just watched her for more signs of what she was feeling. I nodded toward the kitchen. "Come on, dinner is ready. Roast chicken and grilled asparagus with lemon vinaigrette are waiting." She spent a few minutes in Kyle's room while I prepared our plates. 5 minutes later, we sat across from each other, and the silence was heavy. She picked at her food, and I hardly touched mine. "Is everything okay?" I asked after 10 minutes, noticing she had only eaten a few bites. She looked up and tried to smile. "Yeah, Luke, it's really good. I guess I'm just not very hungry." She glanced at my plate. "What about you? Are you feeling okay?" "Just my hip," I said. She nodded, then pushed her plate away. "Let's go get Kyle ready for bed. It's almost his bedtime." "Okay," I agreed, picking up her plate and mine, and putting the leftovers into a container before putting it in the refrigerator. When I turned back, I saw Whitney leading Kyle into the bathroom to brush his teeth. My worries from the morning were turning into real concern. Don't get me wrong, Whitney worked long, tough hours. As she moved up from traffic court to misdemeanors and then felonies, her workload had grown. To be honest, she wasn't even that late tonight. Her long hours had become normal since she'd taken the role of lead felony prosecutor. Back in the bedroom, I changed into my comfortable clothes and put on my reading glasses, then threw on my robe. I went back to hug and kiss Kyle goodnight, picked up my book, and looked around for Whitney. I heard a noise in the garage and walked over there. "Are you out here?" I called into the darkness. "Over here," she sniffled. I turned on the light and saw her in the corner, hugging herself tightly, staring away from me. "Whitney," I said, stepping onto the cold cement floor. "What's wrong?" She just shook her head, and I could hear her crying. As I moved closer, she squeezed herself even tighter, and I started to feel really worried. It was a cold, shivery feeling, the kind you get when you sense something bad is about to happen. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. "You're going to hate me," she said, still looking at the wall. "Why? What's going on?" Whitney lowered her head and didn't answer. "What have you done?" I asked, not wanting to know, but needing to find out. We need..." she said, looking at me for help. Her eyes were begging me to stop asking. Now that I think about it, I wonder if I made a mistake. I sometimes think about whether things would have turned out the same if I had just given her time to sort things out by herself. If I had let her figure it out alone, would everything have been different? I'll never know the answer to that. Whatever was hurting her was also hurting me, and I needed to understand what was going on. For my own peace of mind, she had to tell me why she was so upset. "I'm your husband," I finally said. "I love you and I'm here for you. You can tell me anything." She hesitated, her eyes begging me to drop it. "This is just getting worse, Whitney," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "You're not talking to me. I don't know what's bothering you and I need you to share it. Is it me? Us? Is there something going on at work?" She murmured something, but I couldn't catch it. "What?" I asked. She turned to face me, her expression full of pain. "It's everything. It's you. It's me. It's us. It's work. I'm just not happy." Her words hit me hard like a sudden blow. "Us?" I whispered. "What's wrong with us?" She shook her head. "It's not just about us. It's everything. The whole thing. It all feels so, I don't know, stale. There's no spark, no excitement, just routine." I stayed quiet, trying to understand what she was saying and what it meant for our family. "I don't feel alive anymore," she pleaded. "It's like I'm just going through the motions. I mean, I love you. I love Kyle, but my life feels like it's stuck. I wake up, get ready for work, and grab a few moments with you all before I hurry off. Then I spend 10 or 12 hours trying to deal with people who are always causing trouble, trying to keep things in order until they finally get it together. After that, I rush home and try to relax for just an hour, helping Kyle get cleaned up and doing the dishes. Then it's time for bed. I wake up the next day and do it all over again. I usually handle the dishes, cooking, bathing, and homework. I remember she cried, but that's not the point. You manage to do everything and I feel stuck. But weekends are all about getting the house ready for the next week. I just wish things were different. Different how? Maybe a different job. You should go for it. You know I'll be behind you." She shook her head. "Will that really change everything?" I frowned. "What do you mean? I think we should take some time apart." Her tears were dry and her expression was serious. "I need space to figure out what I want. And what about us? What about Kyle?" She scoffed angrily. "Kyle doesn't need me to take care of him. He has you." "So you're leaving him?" I asked. "I'm not leaving him," she snapped. "I'm not abandoning him. I'm not running away from my child." "Then what are you doing?" I asked, feeling anger rising in me. "I'm taking time to sort myself out. I need to be a better mother for him." I just stared at her, waiting for her to finish her thought. After a moment, I wondered what she wasn't saying. "So you're not planning to think about whether you want to stay married?" I guessed. "You already seem to have decided." Whitney's lips pressed together. "Tell me." "I don't know." "Is there someone else?" She paused and then shook her head. "Who is he?" I said. "I already told you there is no one else," she replied. "I haven't cheated on you, but maybe you're interested in someone else, aren't you?" She turned away and wouldn't answer. "And this time apart?" I said, feeling more frustrated. "You want to see if it might work out with someone else. If it does, you'll leave me, right? Or were you just going to leave me anyway? Either way, it sounds like that." Her voice dropped, void of feeling, almost like she was getting ready to say just that. "When does it start? Where are you going? And what about him? I don't know. Which part? Which part don't you know?" She turned back, her eyes dull, her voice calm. "I don't know when it will start. I don't know where I'll go. I probably won't move in with him, but I can't be sure. I just haven't thought that far ahead." "What do you mean you haven't thought that far ahead? You're a lawyer, for goodness sake. All you do is think and plan." "You pressed me," she said. "I didn't want to tell you yet." I replied, "You didn't want to tell me yet? What were you planning? Get everything ready? Pack your things, give me a quick kiss on the cheek, and ride off into the sunset after almost 10 years together? That's how you'll handle this?" She didn't say anything, but her face showed me that was exactly her plan. I sighed and said, "Do whatever you want. It's clear where I stand in your life." "And Kyle, too," I added. "Don't you dare," she started, but I cut her off. "While we're at it, we need to think about what we're going to tell Kyle." Her expression froze at that. She couldn't finish what she wanted to say. "We'll both handle it together, and we won't blame each other," I said. But you're the one who needs to come up with a plan for this one, lawyer girl. She just nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I watched her for a moment, my anger fading away. This felt strange, like a scene from a sci-fi movie. Am I a loving husband who's willing to give up, or am I someone who won't fight a losing battle? I had been trained to fight in a war. Every day I'd feel the effects of that fight. If I fought for my marriage and our family, would I have to deal with the same costs? Would I see Whitney's regret every day for sticking with us? Or would I find happiness in a stronger marriage and a happier son? Would that help me think clearer and find a way forward? I turned and left the garage. The next morning, I woke up almost an hour before my alarm. Whitney was curled up beside me, snoring softly. I was surprised. I thought she should be sleeping on the couch. But what did I know? Divorce wasn't something I was familiar with. Then I thought back to our wedding and what my best man said. "Are you sure this is what you want?" my brother Mark asked. I just smiled. He said, "It's not too late." I reassured him, "She's the one." He nodded but added, "If there's one thing you never want to be, it's someone's ex-husband. No matter what, keep your life together, okay? And make sure she does too." I laughed and said, "Stop worrying." That conversation replayed in my mind as I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, shave, and shower. How could I make it work? How could I stay calm when I didn't even know what went wrong? How could I keep her from giving up on us when she seemed to have moved on to someone else? I really didn't know how to handle this. "Morning," Whitney said as she appeared in the open doorway while I was stepping out of the shower. I hurried back in and wrapped myself in the shower curtain. "Wow, Luke," she said, her sad face quickly changing to anger. "It's not like I've never seen it before." I tried to keep my voice calm, even though I felt overwhelmed. "Back when we were together." Her anger turned to shock, as if I had shocked her. Part of me felt a strange thrill from getting a strong reaction. The other part of me felt bad for being so harsh. After a moment, I decided to speak. "If you'll excuse me, I'd like to finish getting ready. You can use the master bath if you want." She stared for a moment longer before closing the door. I got dressed in jeans and a shirt, reading the news and sipping my coffee while Kyle had his cereal and toast, nearing the end of my second and last cup. Whitney came out of the bedroom. "Hey," she said cheerfully to Kyle. "Morning, sweetie," she added, leaning down to kiss his cheek before pouring herself a cup of coffee. I could feel her watching me, but I stayed focused on the news. "Did you sleep okay last night?" she asked. "Looks like the Cubs are going to have another tough season." "Dad?" Kyle said. I lowered the paper. "What is it, buddy?" "Mom asked if you slept okay last night." "Oh," I replied, smiling at him. "No, not really." "Me neither," Whitney said. I continued to ignore her and went back to my reading. She sighed softly, and I could feel her mood drop. "Can we talk?" she asked. I lowered the paper again, trying to stay calm in front of Kyle. "About what?" "Last night. There's more to discuss." She glanced at Kyle, who was focused on his cereal and reading the comics. "Please now." She shook her head. "Maybe tonight when I get home." "Then fine," I said, bringing the paper back up and reading for what felt like the 10th time that the Cubs' pitching wasn't looking good. I was packing my notes and books into my briefcase after my history class ended. I could hear the classroom doors slamming as students left, chatting about parties or dates instead of working on their term papers. "You okay, Professor?" I looked up to see Heather Farley standing a few feet away from the lectern. She looked concerned, her face sweet and innocent. 21 years old, with long, shiny hair and a natural blonde look. "I'm all right, Miss Farley," I said. "Is there something you need?" "You don't seem all right," she replied, lowering her voice so no one else could hear. "You look distracted and upset." I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You can sense these things. That's just how life is." I said this to lighten the mood. Some days are just harder than others. Heather just gazed at me without saying a word. Her bright green eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel the weight of her look. I broke the silence by snapping my briefcase shut. "If there's nothing else, I have to go," I said. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm a good listener." "I'll keep that in mind, Miss Farley," she said softly. She turned, picked up her backpack from her desk, and walked out. I watched her leave and finally took a breath when she vanished into the hallway. "Pretty nice, Haddock," Tony Granger said, grinning widely as I turned to face him. Yes, indeed, Mr. Granger. Quite nice, I replied. If the rumors in the faculty lounge were true, Heather Farley had offered comfort to at least one professor during her time at Chadwick College. I always thought that professor was wrong for taking advantage of her. Now, I envied him, and I doubted it was him who took advantage. I suspected it was the other way around. So, who do I ask? I asked Doug Morrissey. And you're asking me why? He said. Because you've been through this before and I don't want to relive everything. I'm just asking you who I should call for a lawyer. I don't know much about attorneys. He sighed, his cheeks drooping as he let out a breath. Just tell me who you used. Don't go with him. He was terrible. Totally useless. Did you see someone else who might actually help? Doug grimaced as he recalled the memory. Jermaine's lawyer, Rebecca Galarza. She works with Eric Taylor. I think they're partners now. He nodded. And they're good. She's good. He looked at me seriously. Do you remember my big case, my pride and joy? I nodded. I think Jermaine used it to pay her fees, and then she got it in the divorce, along with most everything else. I'm sorry, I said, relieved that I didn't have anything special to lose in my divorce. Well, not much except my battle dioramas in the basement. Whitney wouldn't care about those. No, I had nothing to lose except Kyle, and he was everything to me. Are you okay? Doug asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. What if I lose him? I asked about Kyle. What if she gets custody? Doug reached over, placing a hand on my shoulder. Listen to me, Luke, he said gently, and I could tell he was serious. Can this be fixed in any way? I really don't know. I answered honestly. This caught me by surprise. I'm not even sure what's happening. This is so unexpected. He nodded and shook his head. Because this is going to be tough, my friend. Believe me, it will be worse than you think. If you can stop it, you should do it right away. I felt a chill run through me. Kyle and I were leaning over the kitchen table. He was working on a math worksheet. I was filling out a form for a client that the receptionist at Taylor and Galarza, attorneys at law, gave me. Whitney walked in just after 5. Kyle's face lit up, and he jumped from the table to greet her. Hey, Mom, she said, picking him up in her arms and hugging him tightly. How was school? Okay, he replied, then wriggled out of her hug and hurried back to the table, grabbing his homework. I watched him the whole way, from the hug back to the table, and then down the hall to his room where he was putting away his homework to finish it later. Hey, Whitney said, placing her hand on my shoulder. I looked up at her, noticing her hand. She quickly pulled her hand away as if she had touched something hot. Sorry. I returned to my form, carefully filling in the blanks. Whitney sat across from me at the table. So, you didn't even want to wait for us to talk, right? I raised an eyebrow at her. Wait for what? To see a lawyer. She pointed to the form. I hadn't tried to hide it from her. They're good, by the way. You could have done a lot worse. Could I have done better? I asked. She shrugged. Not really. I only know what I hear at the courthouse. I nodded. Why the rush? Why couldn't you wait for us to talk? I set down my pen and crossed my arms over the form. Is that really going to help? I asked. Did you change your mind? Are you thinking of giving this another shot? I watched her face as she thought about what to say. She looked confused, and her lips moved a few times without words. That's why I had the form out in front of her. I wanted her to consider the choice she was making and think carefully about it. Kyle, sweetie, I called over my shoulder to my son, who was just coming out of his room. Can you go back to your room and finish your homework? Mom and I need to have a talk first. Then we'll all eat, okay? Sure, Dad, he said happily before going back to his room. When I turned to look at her, Whitney was staring at the table. Okay, I said. You wanted to talk. We have about half an hour before he finishes his homework and dinner is ready. So what do you want to discuss? Why are you in such a hurry? She replied, You've already spoken to a lawyer. Why the rush? If I hadn't pushed you last night, if I hadn't found you in the garage and made you talk, you would have kept quiet. You wouldn't tell me until you were gone or had your own lawyer and plans, right? Her silence confirmed it. Well, Whitney, I don't want to be caught off guard again. I don't want to show up one day and find the locks changed or you gone, starting a new life with someone else. I wouldn't do that to you. Really? You wouldn't? I laughed. That's amusing. So, what have you already done? I told you I'm confused. I'm not happy, and I need time to think for my own peace of mind. And you mentioned that getting your mind right might include another man, a man you're not seeing already. I said I'm not seeing anyone, she shot back. It's been complicated. Her face showed she felt guilty. You just, what? Held hands? Had a few lunches? Maybe kissed? This isn't about him, she insisted. He's a problem for tomorrow. This is about you and me. It's about you deciding you're not happy. So, what's bothering you? I asked. Is it the fact that I do most of the housework, cooking, cleaning, and take care of Kyle's homework and meals? Is that what you're unhappy about? Your hours are shorter than mine, she said, looking away. You know it's always been that way. I've never cared about that, and I still don't, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. When was the last time I complained about any of this? Have I ever insisted you do less? She didn't answer. So, have I? I pressed. No, Luke, you never have. Then what is it, Whitney? What's wrong? Tears streamed down her face, and she shook as she cried silently. I got up, grabbed a roll of paper towels, and set them in front of her. Your tears don't change anything. Don't I at least deserve to know why you're unhappy? She nodded slowly. I just don't know. I'm just not happy. Then maybe you should find a different job, I suggested. Why are you starting with us instead of finding a new job to see if that helps? You want to change your family. Is that really your best option? She turned to the window, wiping her tears and taking deep breaths to calm herself. If everything is really how you said it was last night, why not try changing just one thing? Maybe look for a new job. You could even work for yourself and have fewer hours. Why are you trying to change everything? She kept staring out the window, and when she spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean closer to hear her. Sometimes I feel like just running away, getting away from it all. I don't know, maybe to a little cabin in the mountains. Then a small smile appeared on her face for a moment. Except when you're with him, I thought. The smile vanished immediately, and her face turned cold from my words. You're not denying it. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back. He's easy to talk to. He makes me feel better, like everything will be okay. Maybe because he's the one you've been sharing your problems with. Maybe because you haven't talked to me in months. She turned to me. But you're already doing so much. You do enough for us. I smiled at that. Really? If I'm doing so much for us, then why can't you take one small step to help save us? Why seek comfort elsewhere and let our family fall apart? You think I have so much to handle? I'd feel resentful about being asked to keep us happy, keep us together. Or maybe I do so much that I've become just a servant. She slumped down like a puppet whose strings were cut. Her head, shoulders, and whole body just sank into the chair. But you're already doing enough. I feel guilty all the time, like you're the only one working hard here, like I'm not needed. I stretched my arm across the table. She looked at my hand for a moment and then placed hers in mine. If you want to do more, I said, trying to smile, I'd happily let you have fewer hours. Maybe just try to come home around the same time every night. I'm also happy to let you take part in all the things you're missing, like cooking. She smiled. And cleaning, homework, mowing the lawn, all of it. Her hand squeezed mine and she lifted her head. I'm not sure I want to do that. The choice is yours. I want our family to stay together for our son. It's up to you to keep us together or let us fall apart. With that, I pulled my hands away and walked off. She tried to say something, but I kept going. The next evening, Whitney came home again just after 5. By 5:30, we had all finished eating, and I stood up from the table. Where are you going? She asked, as I walked toward the door leading to the basement. You can clean up for once. I'm going to play with my soldiers, I replied. I thought we could talk more, she said. I didn't really listen to her as I walked away. Once I was in the basement, I turned on the lights and saw a sight I hadn't spent time with in 3 years. Taking care of a son tends to keep you away from your hobbies. In the long, narrow basement, there were several tables. Each table had a small model of a famous battle from history. I walked over to the first table and stopped at the display of Thermopylae, the hot gates. I had built a model of the mountains to the west and the sea to the east, along a narrow stretch of beach. King Leonidas and his Spartan warriors, along with soldiers from other Greek city-states, were bravely trying to hold off King Xerxes and his huge Persian army. The Persians outnumbered the Greeks by at least 50 to 1. They were sneaking through a mountain path to attack the brave Greeks. A line of Persians were moving towards them with the help of a traitor. The brave Greeks soon faced attacks both from the side and from behind, and they fought valiantly until the end. The 3 days that Leonidas and his men held their ground gave the other Greek city-states time to prepare their defense against the invasion. I thought about this for a moment before moving to the second scene from Gettysburg. This was not the famous charge of Colonel Chamberlain or Pickett's attack, but rather a scene from the very first day of battle. Brigadier General Buford's cavalry had dismounted and was fighting alongside the 1st Brigade of the 1st Division, known as the Iron Brigade. Together, they were bravely trying to stop the stream of Confederate soldiers from Archer's brigade, who were advancing down the main road into Gettysburg. By holding back this charge at a great cost, the Union forces kept the high ground, which was crucial for the rest of the battle. Unfortunately, the price was high, including the loss of one of the best leaders in the Army of the Potomac. I leaned in to look closely at the figures I had made. The figures were gathered around the lifeless body of Major General John Reynolds, who had been shot in the early minutes of the battle. His courage and the sacrifice of his men shaped the course of the fight from the very first shots fired. There were 2 more complete battle scenes, and 1 half-finished model waiting for my attention. There was a picture showing the tunnels being dug and bombs being placed beneath 2 lines in the ground. One scene reminded me of the terrible battles of World War I. In another part of history, Hannibal and his forces from Carthage were outsmarting the stronger Roman army at Cannae, marking a high point in the Second Punic War. I barely paid attention to those events. The battles and clever military tactics were not as important to me at that moment as the price of betrayal and the need to hold the high ground. I stopped at the last table and touched the rough, broken landscape of Stalingrad. It was all there in the largest model I had ever created. There were the broken shells of destroyed buildings, notable sites like Pavlov's house and a nearby tractor factory. Rubble filled the streets, and a hill at Miami of Kurgan overlooked the remains of the city and the river Volga in the distance. It took me months to make the scenery look just right, and the only figures in it were boats filled with soldiers crossing the Volga, surrounded by splashes of fake water. Now it was time to start adding the Russian and German soldiers and weapons, bringing life to a dying city. I felt heavy as I looked at the scene, a dying city, and the thought of a fading marriage and fatherhood. I turned when I heard footsteps on the stairs. "Dad, over here!" I called, trying to shake off my thoughts. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to make some soldiers." "Can I help?" he asked eagerly. "Sure, come here, little man." He smiled and hurried to my side. "What's this?" he asked, eyes wide at the grim sight of destruction. "This shows what can happen when people don't get along," I said, pulling him in for a hug. "They do this?" He nodded, looking serious. "It's pretty sad." "Yep, so what are we going to create?" he asked, excitement growing as he got to work with me for the first time. "It's time to start carving some soldiers," I replied. I spent the next 2 hours teaching Carl how to shape soldiers from clay before making plaster casts of them. Whitney never came down. After I got Kyle cleaned up, brushed, and tucked into bed, I returned to the living room and grabbed my book about the Punic Wars. I knew about the Third Punic War, which started when Carthage finished repaying Rome for losses from the earlier conflict. Rome, with a growing population and no more money coming in from Carthage, decided to take over Carthage and its rich farms once and for all. They besieged the city, cutting off food to its people. When Carthage finally gave up, the people were made slaves, and the city and its impressive harbor were destroyed. Carthage was wiped off the map and would never come back. The Romans started the war with lies and tricks, which brought them a lot of trouble. Kyle and I spent Saturday morning making toy soldiers. We were shaping molds and pouring hot metal into them. Around 11:30, Whitney appeared at the bottom of the basement stairs. "Do you think that's safe?" she asked. "What do you mean?" I replied. "He's not playing with hot metal. He's learning how to do something, the right way and the safe way." "What if he messes up?" she worried. "Come on, Mom," Kyle said. He's not letting me pour it. I'm just holding it. And look, I have to wear this. He lifted his tiny arm to show off a large fireproof glove that covered his hand and arm up to his elbow. It's fun, he said. We're making soldiers. Whitney started to speak, but paused, studying us. I focused back on pouring the last mold. Ready? I asked. Kyle nodded. I poured a steady stream of hot metal into the funnel, using my other hand to help steady it. Okay, I said after pouring. I set the pan aside and helped guide his hand so he could lift the funnel and let the last drops fall into the pan. When I turned back, Whitney was still there, watching us with a worried look on her face. Are you two going to make more? She asked, her eyes downcast. Do you need me for something? She added cautiously. I was going out for a bit, she said awkwardly. Could you keep an eye on him for a few hours? I stared at her, surprised by what she just said. You said you wanted to spend more time at home with Kyle. Whitney looked upset, her teeth clenched. I know, but I talked with Kyle about planning something special for tonight. I just need you to help until then. She glanced at me and I nodded. Got it. She frowned and said, We'll talk later, Dad. I looked down at Kyle, who looked worried. I put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. Don't worry about it, okay? His face showed he was still concerned. Right now, let's just focus on having fun, Kyle. It's a family thing, like when I thought about getting a dog. But this is a different kind of talk, I promise. He looked a bit more relaxed, but still nervous. Did I do something wrong? He asked. I picked him up and hugged him tightly. Not at all, I whispered in his ear. You did nothing wrong, little buddy. When we got back from the park at 3, Whitney was home. It didn't look like she had relaxed at all. Instead, she seemed very anxious, sitting at the dining table, flipping through a cookbook, and glancing at us when we entered before looking back at the book. She couldn't settle down. Do you want to do this now? I asked. She shook her head. I would rather just talk to you for a few minutes, I said to Kyle. Why don't you go take a bath now? But Dad, he pleaded, hop in the bath, get cleaned up, put on your pajamas, and we'll order some pizza and stay up late watching movies. Okay. The smile on his face was huge. Deal. I watched as Kyle went into the bathroom to fill up the tub while I sat at the table. Whitney looked troubled. What's wrong? I asked. Everything just feels so confusing, she replied softly. I nodded, not saying anything. A moment later, Whitney spoke again. It seemed like such a great idea at the beginning. It was like a dream I had. And the more I thought about it, the better it got, she continued. Still, I stayed quiet, leaning back in my chair and observing her. Are you going to say anything? I'm listening, I prompted, trying to understand what was happening just the way I had been for the last few days. I told you, she said. I might have let myself get lost in a fantasy with someone else. So, someone else has been part of this? I asked. Have you really been dreaming about him? I told you I haven't been with anyone else, she insisted. Then what have you been up to? I pressed. She looked out the window and I could see a hint of worry on her face. Is that what I thought? I said softly. Yet you still won't share anything with me. All you say is that I'm not what you want anymore for some unclear reason. You say I'm the reason for your struggle, but you won't explain why. You won't tell me how to help or how to compete with this unnamed person, I said. I leaned a bit closer and she turned to face me, her eyes wide. I shouldn't have to compete, Whitney. We're married. This isn't just a young romance. I'm sorry, she said. I can't control how I feel. I get that, I replied. But tell me this. Did these feelings start before or after this guy came into your life? What does it matter? She asked. Because I'm trying to figure out if these feelings were yours alone or if he played a part in you wanting to leave me, I said. It's not like that, she insisted. See? I said, leaning back again. You defend him. This guy you won't tell me about or what's going on between you two. It's like you believe you can keep this all a secret from me. Just tell me you're leaving me. If you have someone else, then let me know, but you refuse to say what I did wrong or who he is. I have my own life too, she countered. That's true, I agreed. You deserve your own life, and it looks like that's what you're choosing, a life away from me. Her eyes grew wide. What are you saying? I have an appointment on Monday afternoon to hire lawyers, I told her. But I don't want a divorce, she said quickly. Oh, really? But you still want to keep your new friend on the side? Do you really want me to keep living with a wife who suddenly does not love me anymore? Do you want me to be second to another man? Is that what you want? And do you expect me to be okay with losing all closeness with my legally married wife? Tears rolled down her face. Why are you pushing me? Can't you just give me some time? Did you give me time? Did you give me a chance to make you happy? Did you think about our marriage before bringing another man into your life? I think I know the answer. My legally wedded wife. I have not cheated on him yet. Her face showed so much pain. She was feeling so many things at once. It felt like I was losing my strength and the anger was fading. Do you really think we have a chance here? I don't know, but maybe there is a chance. She nodded slightly. Better than 50-50. I'm not sure. I remembered what Doug had said. Do whatever it takes. Anything to avoid a divorce. Anything to save the marriage. When will you know? She shrugged her shoulders. Would you see someone? Maybe a therapist or a counselor? Her face changed immediately. Why? Do you think I'm crazy? Just because I might not want to be with you anymore? I held back my words and took a breath. No. I think that maybe you are feeling down because I'm not happy with us. Because I don't want to be married to you anymore. There it is, I said, pushing back from the table. You can't even tell me the truth. What do you mean? 30 minutes ago, you said you didn't know if there was a chance for us. Now you're saying you don't want to be married to me anymore? That's not what I said. But that's what it sounds like, I replied. I walked around the table to check on Kyle in the bathroom. She reached out to stop me, and I paused without looking at her. I said we would give him one last good night tonight. Get yourself ready for the talk with him tomorrow. Her hand held onto my shirt, trying to keep me there. I gently pulled her fingers off of me. Then I walked to the bathroom. I was really starting to doubt what Doug had said. It was wearing heavily on my mind. Keep the marriage together. The cost was rising. I had to get my emotions under control so my little boy wouldn't realize his world was about to change. I will say this about Rebecca Galarza. She was very beautiful. The kind of beauty that makes it hard to think, with that extra something that draws you in and leaves you daydreaming about her the whole time. She walked into the small waiting room and extended her hand. Mr. Patterson, she said. I corrected her, trying not to drop my jaw. She looked to be in her mid-30s, dressed simply in a white blouse and tan slacks. The simple colors really made her smooth olive skin and long black hair stand out. She had the face of a classic Spanish beauty, with high cheekbones, a narrow chin, big round dark brown eyes, and full lips. Her figure was very attractive too. What caught my attention most was how she carried herself and the way she looked at you. It was a bold, direct gaze that seemed to challenge you. It felt like she dared you to get close to her in a way that would get everyone's attention. I noticed she wasn't wearing a ring, as if no one had tied her down yet. After a moment, she smiled, and her eyes sparkled with curiosity about what I would say. Right, was all I managed to reply. She waved her arm toward the door, and I stepped around her into a conference room. Okay, she said, pulling out a pair of reading glasses from her pocket to read my questionnaire. Why don't you tell me what's happening? She asked. I don't know, I replied. She looked up, raising her eyebrow. You don't know? Seriously? Whitney, that's my wife. She says she's not happy with her job, her marriage, me, pretty much everything. Is she going through a tough time? A family issue or something at work? I shrugged. No one's died, and no one is about to either, at least not that I know. But I have heard something about a big drug case taking place. Her eyes narrowed. Your wife is Whitney Patterson, the prosecutor? I nodded. Is that a problem? Not really. It's just that most judges probably won't take the case. We'll likely get someone from another county. She shrugged. It's hard to know how another judge will react, but I don't think it will be an issue for your office. She shook her head and added, I'll check with my partner, but I don't see a problem. We handle some criminal cases here. I used to work with her before I came here 4 years ago. Were you friends? We never went out for drinks or anything, so I wouldn't really call us friends. I nodded. She says you guys are good. She agreed with a slight nod, as if such compliments were normal. So back to what's going on. Is there someone else involved? Yeah, She says they're just friends, but she's mentioned them a few times. I'm pretty sure they are more than just friends. How much more? I have no idea. She's not saying. Who is it? She won't tell me. She pursed her lips, and for a moment, I imagined leaning across the table and kissing her. Catching my gaze, she smiled. It says here you have a young son together. Have you really thought this through? In what way? She leaned over the table. Are you sure you don't want to just wait a little? Maybe see if she can figure things out? I shook my head. It's about pride. It's not just about the other man. I stopped for a moment, trying to sort out my confused thoughts. Wait a minute. It's not just that. The real issue is that she won't even tell me what's going on. It's like she doesn't want me anymore. I don't know why, and she isn't sharing anything. I do so much for her, for us, for our family. I'm the one looking after Kyle. Most of the time, I take care of the housework and help with her job, and all I get in return is that she doesn't love me anymore. Rebecca was writing quickly on a notepad in front of her. When you say you do most things, including taking care of Kyle, let's be clear. How? Who makes his breakfast? Usually it's me. Almost all the time. Who helps him with his homework? Same goes for laundry? Dinner? Yes, that too. She looked into my eyes and I could see a spark of excitement in hers. He's in first grade, I noted. Did you go to the parent-teacher meetings? Of course. Did Whitney? She couldn't leave the office. She smirked. You want custody? My eyes grew wide. Is that possible? From what I hear, it's not just possible, it's likely. Really? She laughed lightly. The judge won't care who has the man parts. You're both equal, unless one of you isn't doing a good job. The one who takes care of him the most gets custody. I was speechless. I thought Whitney, being the mother, would take custody without question. Now this amazing woman was saying I could get custody if I wanted it. Well, she said, what do you think? Of course I want custody. And you can manage it with your job as... She flipped back to the first page of the form. A history teacher at Chadwick. I nodded. Yes, I can handle it with my job. Great, she said, her face lighting up. She wrote on the notepad, custody to LP. Now let's talk about your finances. I felt like I was flying when I left the law office of Taylor and Galarza. Was it going to be hard? Yes, but it wouldn't be as bad as I thought. The property split would likely be around 50-50. The chances for alimony were low, and thank goodness I might just get custody of Kyle. I drove to the park to pick up Kyle. He was there with our neighbor Sally and her group of kids. Dad! Kyle shouted from the swings when he saw me. Hey, little man, I said, walking toward him as he jumped off the swing and ran into my arms. Are you doing okay? I asked, holding him close. I guess so, he whispered in my ear, squeezing me tightly. I squeezed him back, knowing there would be tough times ahead when he might cry again, just like he had the day before, feeling sad about our family and missing one of his parents. I love you, I said. You know that, right? I love you too, he replied. He leaned back and looked at my face. Can we go home now and make some more toy soldiers? Absolutely, I replied, easing him down as his weight began to make my hip ache. We said our goodbyes to Sally, who seemed calm while her 4 kids ran around and yelled. Thanks, I said as we turned to leave. Anytime, Doc, she responded. Sally and her husband, Charlie, both called me Doc at school. The students called me Professor, but I was only called Doctor during boring lectures or when I presented papers to my colleagues. Charlie and Sally seemed proud to live next door to a real professor. It felt like proof that an electrician and his wife, who had no college education, could succeed in America alongside those of us who did go to college. So they called me Doc, not really to honor me, but to remind themselves of how fortunate they were. Watching Sally handle her kids while they were running around, I couldn't help but feel a bit envious. For the first time, they made me think about how well they were doing and how difficult my life was. They earned enough to live happily in a nice home and spend time together and with their kids. Their love for each other was clear to everyone. I just couldn't picture them in my situation or me in theirs. I had a doctorate because it was my way out of my father's business. My family was falling apart, and I was soon going to balance a full-time job with full-time parenting. After 7 years of education, both Whitney and I felt like failures in the most important part of our lives. Whitney got home by 5:30. Hey, baby, she said to Kyle. Hi, Mom. he mumbled, not looking up from his homework. That was it. No hug. He sighed, stood up, walked over and gave her a quick hug. She tried to dry his hair with a towel, but he went back to his work. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Spelling," he replied. "Need some help?" she asked. "Dad already helped me," he said. Whitney turned to me with a sad expression. I tried to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. Instead, I felt bad for Kyle. He was too young to fully understand what was happening, but he sensed that Whitney was responsible. Or maybe he knew he spent most of his time with me and didn't want to mess that up. Whitney lowered her head and walked to the bedroom to change. "You want to come in and help me for a second?" I asked Kyle. "Sure," he said, joining me with a big smile. "Here," I said, handing him a vegetable peeler. "Let's peel some carrots, okay?" "Sure," he replied, taking the peeler and starting on the carrots. "You know," I started, unsure of how to continue. "What? She's your mom," I said. "She loves you more than you realize, especially when you have kids of your own someday." He didn't respond, but I noticed his bottom lip was sticking out. "Maybe you should give her some space, little man." He frowned and said, "Why? She's the one leaving, Dad." I knelt down next to him. "But this isn't your fault, okay? You need to believe that she isn't leaving because of you." "I don't care," he said, his voice getting louder. "What does it matter why she's going? The only thing that matters is that she's leaving, and I won't see you anymore." Tears were building up in his eyes and rolling down his cheeks. "Sure you will," I said, using my thumb to wipe away his tears. "We'll see each other all the time." "That's not what Tammy Pulaski says. She says she never sees her dad. Never." I hugged him tightly. "But you're not Tammy Pulaski, and I'm not Tammy Belushi's dad. What if we move far away? How will you see me then?" I held his shoulders and looked him in the eye. "It doesn't matter if you move to the South Pole. I'll still come to see you. Got it?" He nodded. "If I have to wrestle polar bears and deal with the penguins, I'll still find you." "Okay," he said, giggling while wiping his tears. "Why would you deal with the penguins?" "Just if they get in my way," I joked. He giggled again, then went back to his toy. "Dad," he said after a few minutes. "Yeah? Can we make some more soldiers after dinner? We'll ask your mom. If she says it's okay, then we will." "Fair enough. I guess so." It was almost 11 when I finally went to bed. The lights were off, and as I took off my jeans and put on my flannel pajama bottoms, Whitney spoke up. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For talking to Kyle earlier. I heard you." I just grunted in response. She was quiet as I got comfortable under the covers, lying on my back and staring at the ceiling for a bit. "Look," I finally said. We had been sleeping in the same bed since things got tough. It felt natural, but we hadn't really talked to each other. This silence seemed strange now. "Why are you wearing pajama bottoms to bed?" she asked. I thought about it. I hadn't really planned it, unlike using another bathroom, which was on purpose. Wearing pajama bottoms just felt right now. "Are you still awake?" I asked. "Yeah." "Whit, I'm still awake." She turned toward me, and I could see her moving closer until her face was almost touching mine. "I want to be close," she said softly. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Why not?" she asked. "It's not that you don't want me anymore." "I think it's the other way around," I said. "But I want to be close now." I turned on the light and lay back to face her. "What's happening here?" I asked. I don't know. It feels like we're strangers all of a sudden." I let out a bitter laugh. "No kidding, you know what I mean?" "No, Whit, I don't. I'm still trying to understand how you can wake up one morning and decide you want someone else. A few days later, you returned and said you wanted me. I thought that meant something. I guess I was wrong. It seems like you don't really want me either." I got out of bed. "Where are you going?" you asked. "To the couch," I replied, grabbing a pillow. "Being here doesn't feel right anymore." "Please," you said. I glanced down and saw you were under the sheets with nothing on. You looked both beautiful and vulnerable, and I hadn't been with anyone in almost 5 weeks. "Please look," you repeated, your hand gently touching my pants. I wanted to, more than anything. I was tempted to hop back into bed with you, but then my mind filled with memories from the past week. "I'm signing the papers on Thursday," I said, my voice shaky. Your hand froze, and I could see fear in your eyes. What papers? You asked. To start the divorce, I explained. They'll be ready on Thursday. You pulled your hand away and curled up into a small ball. You can go to the sheriff's office to pick them up, I added, trying to avoid making it harder for you. You didn't respond, just stared at a spot on the wall, lost in your thoughts. I watched you for a moment, pushing aside my earlier thoughts. Then I reached over, turned off the light, and walked to the sofa. As I walked away, I said, "You made this choice for us, Whit. I don't know if you'll be with someone new in a few days, but while I'm in this house, you will be alone." The next day, Luke was with Doug. "What's the rush, Luke?" Doug asked. "What?" Peggy said as she slid into the booth beside him and set her tray on the table. Luke glanced at me for approval before replying, "He's getting a divorce." Peggy didn't respond. Instead, she buttered her roll and dipped it into her soup. "Did you hear me?" Doug asked. "I heard," she said, chewing while looking at me. When she swallowed, she placed the roll back on her tray. "Are you seeing someone else?" she asked me directly. "No." "Are you sort of?" she pressed. "Sort of." "Come on, Luke. Is she with someone else? Yes or no?" "Probably not," I said. "But there's another guy? I know that much. She claims they're not together like that, but I can't tell if she's being honest." "Then she's probably seeing him," Peggy said, scooping her soup. "She says she's confused," I shared, taking a sip of my coffee. "She's in a tough spot, not happy with work or with me." Peggy nodded, still eating her soup in silence. "You think she's just dealing with something?" Doug asked her. "Like what?" Peggy replied. "I don't know her well. Maybe a mood swing or feeling down." Peggy laughed. "Men, you always act like it has to do with us and not just how we feel." "Come on," Doug said. She glanced at him, then turned to face me. "All right, tell me what you know." "I just did," I replied. "Has she been distant?" "Yeah, for about 2 or 3 months." "Has she been sleeping more than usual?" "No." "What about her looks? Has she stopped taking care of herself?" "Maybe a little," I admitted. "Her hair hasn't been styled and she seems a bit disorganized." I shook my head. "None of that." "Then it's probably not depression," she said. "I doubt this is something that can be fixed with just talking and some pills." "Don't get me wrong," Peggy continued. "It could be depression, just in a different way. Maybe she's unhappy with her life right now, but there don't seem to be other signs." I nodded. It made sense. "What are you planning to do about it?" she asked after finishing her bowl of soup. "I'm going in tomorrow to sign the divorce papers." "That sounds pretty quick." "No kidding," Doug chimed in. "It's a lot of things," I explained. "She just told me about wanting a separation about 9 or 10 days ago, and it seems she might be with someone new. But I can't just sit here and do nothing. I can't wait around for her to decide what happens." "You need to have some control back in your life and family," she said. "Exactly. I want to be the one to end it." "I get it," she replied. I thought about this. I looked from big, burly Doug to small, fragile Peggy. They were an unusual pair. Doug was a middle-aged literature professor, messy in his personal life, with thoughts bouncing all over the place. Peggy, in her late 30s and never married, was focused and serious, a look not usually seen in someone who helps others. She didn't make excuses and believed in straightforward honesty. Have you ever had someone you thought was your true love suddenly tell you they don't love you anymore? Out of nowhere? I asked. That they're spending time with someone else and he's the one keeping her okay? Yeah, Doug sighed. It's like a punch in the gut. I focused on Peggy. Not really, but let me share. It's terrible. I can't even explain how empty and worthless I felt. There was so much hurt, like betrayal, like I wasn't good enough. I kept wondering how she could do this, not just to me, but to Kyle, too. It felt like she turned into a stranger. You're trying to make sense of it, Peggy said. At first I was, I admitted. But not anymore. I don't want her to be in charge of what happens next. It's because you're scared you can't handle it, and you don't want to feel that way again. Exactly, I replied. She shrugged. That seems normal. Really? Doug and I asked at the same time. Sure, Peggy said, finishing her drink and setting her glass down to look at me. You're not foolish. I don't know everything about your past, but I can guess some of it. I don't think you'll take action just to get back at her. You've thought this through. You've decided you can't go along with her plans. You're taking charge of what's happening. That's good. I don't see why not. I glanced at Doug, who looked unsure. Then Peggy added, "One more thing." I asked, "What's that?" "Remember, this is just a guess," she said as she got up and picked up her tray. "I haven't talked to her or seen anything, so it's just a guess. But she was with him. Whoever he is, she was with him." That hit me hard. It wasn't sadness that made her finally speak to you. She said it was guilt. Guilt about living a double life. Guilt that while she was doing that, you were there taking care of everything. I couldn't speak. Whitney kept saying she hadn't been with him. I wanted to believe her. But doubts crept in. Still, she was very sure. "Maybe it was just once," Peggy said. "Maybe it happened a few times. It could still be happening." I said, "Last night she was still up when I went to bed, and she tried to win you back, didn't she?" I nodded. Peggy smiled. "Then the affair might be over. Her guilt is probably eating her up inside, and being with you might help her feel better about it." I disagreed, but it won't. "She thinks it will," Peggy replied. She paused, as if she wanted to share something else. "What?" Doug asked her. "Just thinking," she said. "Thinking what?" "That I wouldn't want to be in your place right now." "Why's that?" I asked. "Because now your decision is much tougher." "In what way?" "Earlier you said you were thinking about divorce because she pushed you away. But now she's not pushing you away anymore. If I had to guess, she's trying to find a way to move past everything, to forget what she did and get you to forget too, and just go back to how things were. Now I'm the one wanting a divorce. The divorce she probably doesn't really want now," I said. Peggy nodded and offered me a tight smile. "Good luck with that." I felt defeated. "Where's Kyle?" Whitney asked when she came in. "He's next door," I replied, watching him play in the backyard. I heard her take off her jacket and approach me. I was shocked when she hugged me from behind. "I don't want a divorce," she said softly. "When did you stop seeing him?" I asked without moving. She didn't answer. "When was the last time you were with him?" "I didn't do that," she spoke quietly. "You're lying," I said, turning to face her. "So when was it?" "Saturday," she replied. "When you had to leave for a few hours, she didn't say much. Or maybe it was during a quiet lunch on Monday." I pushed for answers. She just looked at me, her face asking me to drop it. I looked back at her, not ready to back down until I knew the truth. I told her I didn't sleep with him. Finally, she replied, "Okay, you two didn't sleep together, but when was the last time you saw him?" I asked her to tell me. She put her hands over her ears. "Why won't you believe me?" "Because I don't," I yelled. "I think you had a relationship with him and were ready to leave me. But now you seem unsure and I don't know why. Is it because you really love me? Or do you not want to lose everything we have? Or did he end things with you after using you?" "I do love you, Luke. I'm sorry. I just forgot that for a little while." I looked at her and could see she was being serious. Her face showed everything she felt. She looked like she was pleading with me to let it go, forgive her, and return to how we used to be. She wanted me to hold her close and tell her everything would be okay. "Say something," she pleaded. "Please, Luke, tell me you still love me. I never stopped loving you, but it's like you forgot me and found someone else." "I'm sorry," she said, rushing to me and hugging me tightly. "I'm really sorry." I didn't hug her back, and she noticed after a moment. "Look," she said, trying to meet my eyes. "I've talked to Rebecca already. I signed the papers an hour ago. But you can still change your mind." "Yes, I can. I will." "Whitney, I'm going through with it. You still won't share anything and just hide it away. There's no way I'm going to let this go. I can't spend my life wondering if you'll hurt me again." She sank into a chair, crying and apologizing. I went out to meet Kyle and take him out for a burger. There are a few things they don't tell you about divorce. For one, it's common to still live in the same house while everything is being worked out in court. That's why Whitney could stay in the house until the final decision, even though it was clear I'd be the one keeping it. It was a gift from my wealthy parents, and she had no right to it in the divorce. Still, she could live there until everything was finalized. Secondly, even simple divorces can take a lot longer than you expect. If both sides agree on everything right away, it could be settled in about 3 months. But if there's even one small disagreement, it could take a year and a half. And yes, that means living in the same house the whole time. I still feel uneasy thinking about it. First, living in the same house during the divorce is really hard for everyone. Doug was right. It was worse than I ever imagined. After we finished looking over our finances, Rebecca suggested we have a meeting to sort things out faster. It was surprising to see a lawyer wanting to get things done quickly and without too much trouble. I was surprised when Professor Patterson, Whitney's lawyer, smiled and reached out to shake my hand. "I'm Jim McNally, Whitney's attorney," he said. He was tall, in his late 40s, with a full head of gray hair and a nice smile. Rebecca had filled me in on him already. He was charming and seemed to know how to get what he wanted. It felt strange to think a lawyer could be so likable. "Call me Luke," I replied. "And I'm Jim." He greeted Rebecca warmly, almost like they were old friends. How did they manage to be so friendly and then argue fiercely against each other? They were certainly their own kind of people. We all entered his office, and I noticed Whitney sitting there, looking nervous. Once we were all seated, McNally asked, "How are we going to fix this mess?" He looked at me, and so did Whitney, but I stayed quiet. I followed Rebecca's advice and let her talk. "It's pretty straightforward," she said. "Joint custody of Kyle. Whitney will be the primary caregiver." "Whitney as the main caregiver?" McNally asked, surprised. He turned to Whitney, but she looked away. "Yes, she is," Rebecca confirmed. "She's the one taking care of Kyle right now, so why change that?" McNally narrowed his eyes, clearly taken aback. When Rebecca said, "Taking care of Kyle," I stepped in to clarify. I feed him, help with his homework, go to his school meetings, take him to the doctor and dentist, and get him to school. I'm the one who looks after him every day. "Are you saying she does nothing?" I looked at Whitney, keeping my gaze on her as I spoke. "Not at all. She helps where she can," I said. "But I only teach 9 hours a week. I spend another 9 hours for office hours, plus time for research and meetings. My schedule works better for his school, so I'm the one who handles it." Whitney broke in. "I work longer hours. I help when I can." That was how it had always been for us. McNally glanced at Whitney, but she kept her eyes down. After a moment, he turned back to us. "Okay, let's put the main caregiver issue aside for now. What are the ideas for visitations?" Rebecca asked. McNally nodded, seeming to expect this suggestion. "Standard visitation," he said. She said that the non-residential parent has to pay the residential parent 20% of their take-home pay. They can share the cost of health insurance, or both can keep him on their own plans. They should also split any medical bills and school fees. He wrote this down on his notepad without saying a word. "What about the money? The house seems like a non-marital asset. You're going to give Whitney a larger share based on this." Rebecca had warned me about this. Even though the house belongs to me and Whitney can't take any of it, the court could still look at everything I own when deciding how to split things. So, since my house is worth $200,000, the judge might give Whitney more than her fair share of our assets. What is she after? McNally looked up, paused, then said, "She has a 401k plan." Rebecca smiled. I noticed that this was a surprise to Luke, too. He knew nothing about it. I glanced at Whitney, not saying anything about this new information, and wondered what else she had hidden from me. She just stared at the notepad in front of her. "Yes," McNally said without any excuses. "Well, it's $90,000. She wants to keep that and everything else." 50-50, he continued. "Their pensions will stay separate. They are worth about the same, so trying to split them will cost more than they're worth. Household items? Kyle's things will go with him no matter where he ends up. I don't want to waste time arguing about anything else. Do you?" "Not really," Rebecca replied. Still, McNally looked at me. "Do you think you and Whitney will have any issues dividing the personal belongings?" I glanced at Rebecca, who nodded, then at Whitney, who still wouldn't meet my gaze. "No," I said, turning back to him. "You're right. As long as I can keep my own things, I don't care about the rest." "Whitney?" he asked. "That's fine," she agreed. He looked at Rebecca. "Can you give us 10 minutes?" She nodded, and we stepped out of the conference room onto the sidewalk outside the office. Rebecca lit a cigarette and took a deep breath. "So, is it going well?" I asked, feeling nervous. "Oh, yes," she said, blowing out smoke and smiling. "Better than I expected." "How come?" I asked. "Remember what I told you at the beginning? Don't hide anything from me." I nodded. "Now you see," she said. "The whole custody issue caught him off guard." "You mean she wasn't honest?" I asked. "It's not exactly a lie," Rebecca explained. "It's more like she can't see the truth clearly. She thinks she's a wonderful mom, always there for everything, whether or not that's true. And that's how she wants it to look. She's scared, just like all clients are. She's scared he won't like her if he thinks she's not a good mom. She can't quite see that you're the one doing most of the work, but she has told me." "I mean, come on, she's a lawyer. Doesn't she already know this?" Rebecca shrugged. "She hasn't worked in private practice before, and she's a mom, too. That often comes first. So, is she lying to herself? Kind of. And how do you know I'm not the one lying? Did you notice her expression when you finished speaking? Not really. Just that she seemed to shrink in her chair." "Exactly. If you were lying, she would have fought back. But she stayed quiet. And McNally knows this, of course. And he's probably telling her right now that she has little chance of winning the custody battle, and even if she does, it will cost her a lot." I thought about this while Rebecca finished her cigarette. It was almost 20 minutes before McNally called us back for the case. He said, once we were seated, "You didn't really answer me, Becca." She smiled. "I want to settle everything globally," she said. "Custody and all." He smiled back, but it looked painful. "And if we give up residential custody?" She glanced at me and I nodded. "If we give it up, she can have it." "And if not?" he asked, looking at Whitney. Rebecca turned to Whitney to stress her point. "If she doesn't agree, we will ask for a 50-50th split of everything included, and we would still get residential custody." Whitney looked up, her gaze fixed on mine. McNally asked, "Do you want a couple of days to think this over?" Her lips moved, but no words came out. She held her gaze on mine, and I thought she might break down. But before that happened, she shook her head. "Write it all up," she said, keeping her feelings under control. "I'll sign it." I didn't respond, surprised by how easy it was. It was early August, a little over 5 months since Whitney first told me she didn't love me. Now, with all the paperwork done and our belongings listed, it took less than an hour around a conference table to settle everything and neatly split 10 years of marriage. I felt strangely disappointed that it could be so simple to end a family. Rebecca guided us on how to proceed, and that's what we did on that warm Saturday morning. 2 weeks later, the settlement papers were ready and signed, with the final hearing in 4 days. We needed to split our belongings before the hearing, so there we stood in the den, placing stickers on the items we wanted. Yellow dots for her, blue dots for me. We had already sorted through the kitchen, dining room, and master bedroom. We only had the family room, guest bedroom, and den left. We hadn't said much and hadn't disagreed on anything. It was a sad day, and I felt like jumping in front of a train just to make it all stop. It would hurt a lot less. "Remember this?" Whitney said, her fingers brushing the frame as she looked at it. "I'll never forget," I replied, gazing at the picture of us 10 years younger, enjoying margaritas on the beach in Cabo during our honeymoon. "Do you remember what we did after those margaritas?" I smiled, recalling how she took me to a quiet rock nearby and surprised me with her charm. We were so caught up in the moment that I forgot to put my swimsuit back on until we almost got seen. She turned to me, searching my face for answers. "What happened, Whit?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What went wrong?" "I don't know," she said softly. The smile from that happy memory vanished. "I don't know." I wiped my tears, placed the sticker on my desk, and turned to her. "You can have everything else," I said. "Everything." "Luke, wait," she said to my back. "I'm sorry." "Really?" But sorry just wasn't enough anymore. 5 months later, and she still wouldn't tell me why or who was involved. "Dad?" Kyle said, his voice small. We were lying on opposite ends of the couch, our feet touching as we read. "I'm still going to see her." I closed my book against my chest. "Anytime you want," I replied. "Promise? She's your mom," I said. "I won't stop you from seeing her, okay?" That was the end of the first week after the breakup. She skipped visiting on Wednesday night to unpack her new place. When I offered her the weekend starting that night, she turned it down to finish settling in. "She'll be here Wednesday, right?" I nodded. "She's just trying to make her new place nice for you, bud." His expression showed he wasn't quite convinced. "Hey," I said, deciding to share my surprise with him. "What? Do you still want that dog?" His face lit up. You mean it? Of course, I said. I had been thinking for months about how to find joy in life again. Kyle always wanted a dog, but Whitney had never allowed it. Now that everything had changed and Kyle needed something to cheer him up, I knew it was the right time. What kind of dog do you want? I asked, as he tossed his book aside and climbed over to me. I don't know, he said, excitement showing on his face. Well, let's start looking, I suggested. Tomorrow? That sounds great, he said, his eyes sparkling. A dog! Then he jumped off the couch. Where are you going? I asked. Next door to tell Tyson, he called over his shoulder. Be back in 15 minutes. Sure thing, he said back. I didn't realize it then, but the next day would bring big changes to our lives. We were up early the next morning. I was awake and ready to go, and he was trying to hurry me along. Calm down, I said, my mouth full of toothpaste. But Dad, he replied, standing next to me and fixing his hair again. The kid really liked his hair neat. You promised. Nothing will be open for a while, he insisted. I finished rinsing my mouth and said, We'll have some breakfast. Then we'll look for the perfect dog. Okay, he said, running out of the bathroom to give me some time to get ready. We had visited 2 pet stores in Rockford and the Winnebago County Animal Shelter. None of the dogs excited Kyle, though, so we decided to stop for lunch at the Grant City Tap before heading to the Lincoln County Animal Shelter. We had just ordered burgers and drinks when Kyle waved at someone behind me. It's Miss Palmer, he said. Your teacher? I turned around and nearly fell out of my chair. 2 women who looked like sisters were smiling and waving at us. I raised my hand in a weak wave. One of the women whispered something to the other, and they both smiled wider. Isn't she pretty? Kyle asked. I thought she was old, I replied, turning back to Kyle. She is pretty, he agreed. Which one is she? He looked back at them, smiled, and then looked at me again. The one in the pink shirt, he said. Which one in the pink shirt? I heard from behind me. Hello, Kyle. Hi, Miss Palmer, Kyle replied. I looked up to see sparkling eyes and a friendly smile. I was asking him which one was his teacher, I said. I'm Kristen Palmer, she said, holding out her hand. Luke Patterson, I replied, shaking her hand. She was attractive, and I understood why Whitney had said she looked like a cheerleader. She looked young enough to be in college. Her face was smooth and oval, with bright eyes and a slightly upturned nose. Her lips were lively and seemed to hint at something mysterious. It felt like she knew what I was thinking. Her light brown hair was cut short and framed her face nicely. And you're the famous Professor Patterson, she said. It's a pleasure to meet you. I laughed a bit. Just Luke. I'm not that famous. I don't know about that, she responded. Kyle says you're a war hero with medals to show for it. I'm just too dumb to duck, I joked. There's nothing heroic about that. We're looking for a puppy, Kyle said suddenly. She turned to him, her face lighting up. She really loved kids, and it was easy to see. What kind of puppy are you looking for? She asked. I admitted I wasn't sure. I told her we were just going to grab some lunch and visit the animal shelter to check for any available puppies. Sounds good, she replied. The waitress came over with our burgers and drinks. I'll leave you boys to it, she said with a smile. Good luck. I watched her walk away. You see what I mean, Dad? I turned to Kyle. Pretty, I said, but I forced myself to keep looking at him. Sure, I replied. I guess so. As we were finishing our burgers, Kristen came back to our table. Sorry to interrupt, she said. I quickly swallowed my bite of food. No problem, I managed to say. It's just that I was talking to Allison, my cousin over there. She mentioned someone has a litter of puppies. There are 3 left. What kind of dogs? I asked. Pugs, like in Men in Black, she smiled. Kyle perked up. Where did you see Men in Black? At Tyson's house, he said, then turned back to Kristen. Those are the ones, she said, grinning. They're cool, Dad, Kyle told me. Who's your friend? I asked. Tim and Nicole Franklin, she replied. They own the bar and grill. I nodded. I had been there a few times and knew the owners by sight. They were about my age, and their kids helped out at the restaurant. Good food, I said. Well, Allison knows them pretty well. She can call and ask if we can drop by. Where do they live? I asked. Out on Seven Oaks, she answered. I looked at Kyle. Well, let's go see them, he said, moving his half-eaten burger and fries to the side. If it's not too much trouble, I said to Kristen. No problem, she replied and headed back to her table. Dad? Kyle whispered. You're staring. I turned back to him with a smile. He rolled his eyes dramatically. I left money on our table and stopped at their table on the way out. Have a seat, Allison said. I don't want to interrupt, I replied. We'll go with you, Kristen said. We'll show you how to get there. They're expecting us in about half an hour, Allison said. We've got time to finish our lunch. I looked at the two of them, surprised by how much they looked alike. I could tell them apart, but they were both very pretty, and they had a mischievous spark in their eyes that made them seem fun. We all watched Kyle giggle on the lawn as the three little puppies tumbled over him, licking and nibbling at him. They all seem to like him, Nicole Franklin said with a smile. Maybe you'd want to take all three, her husband suggested, his arm around her shoulders. They seemed so easy together, happy and content. Let me tell you about a caring couple. I felt a pinch of pain when I saw Kristen looking at me. Her face reminded me of mine at that moment. Gone was her happy smile and bright eyes. Instead, she had a wry smile, one that hinted she once had something precious but lost it. What do you think? I asked her. I think you need to make a choice here, she replied. I nodded, realizing what she meant. The male, I said to Tim. If it's okay, I think we'll take the male. There's always a problem with women. Allison chuckled at that, but Kristen shot her a warning look. In an instant, something changed between them, making Allison's smile look forced. That's great, Tim said. Let me get you a box to take him home in. I've never bought a puppy before, I admitted. Nope, he laughed, shaking his head. Poor guy. Tim, Nicole said, don't talk him out of it yet. I'll grab us some drinks. As he walked toward the garage, he added, I'll tell you all about how to train a puppy and care for him. I started to protest, but Kristen spoke first. Sounds good, she called out, looking right at me with eyes that said to be quiet if I knew what was best. I chose not to argue with those eyes. A half hour later, I felt more relaxed with what I had learned about taking care of a puppy. The main lesson from Tim and Nicole was clear. I was in for a busy 6 months until the little pug was older and trained. I'd be juggling a puppy along with my own son. I can guess what some of you are thinking. What did you expect? Honestly, I hadn't thought about it at all. I never had a dog when I was young, so it never crossed my mind. With Kyle, I wanted a puppy, but Whitney said no. So, here we are. Sometimes things aren't as straightforward as we believe. Yet the look on Kyle's face while he played with that tiny, breathing ball of fur told me there was no turning back. He hadn't been this happy in months. I've never seen him like this, Kristen said as she joined me and watched Kyle play. I sighed. Yeah, it's been a while. She touched my arm and I turned to her. Hang in there, okay? I know this is hard, she said gently. I wanted to ask her how she understood, but then I remembered her own troubled past. I wasn't sure if Whitney had mentioned children she might have, but her expression suggested she knew the struggle well. Thanks, I said, smiling at her. I glanced back at Kyle, rolling around in the grass, and I added, especially for this. No problem, she replied cheerfully. The Franklins had given us enough food to last through the night and into the next morning. They even provided a crate for the little puppy to sleep in until we could go to the store the next day and buy everything we needed for taking care of a dog. So, when Kyle and I got home, we had a great time in the backyard. What should we name him, Dad? Kyle called out. I thought about it as I turned over the barbecue chicken and corn cooking on the grill. Kyle held the small bundle of tan fur with a black face and walked over to the deck. Any ideas, little guy? I asked, worried the wriggly puppy might slip from Kyle's arms and hurt himself, but Kyle held tight. Not really, he said. I was thinking of a general or something, the stuff you always read about. Like General what? I replied. He shook his head. No, they said he's from China. Chinese, I corrected. He's from China, and we call things from China Chinese. He didn't pay attention. Are there any famous generals from China? I tried to remember, pushing aside names that didn't fit. How about Sun Tzu? Who's he? Kyle asked. A famous general from thousands of years ago. He wrote a well-known book. What was it called? The Art of War. And it's still famous? He asked. It's still used today. He smiled. We can call him Sonny for short. I ran my fingers through the puppy's fur and scratched behind his ear. Sonny? That sounds good. The next day, school started for me. It wasn't classes yet, just a lot of meetings to prepare for classes. After the afternoon meetings, I sat in my office going through resumes to choose finalists for 2 research intern positions for the upcoming semester. The pay was low, but many people wanted the jobs. Over 40 students applied, about 2/3 of the seniors studying history or similar subjects. After an hour, I narrowed it down to 3 candidates for the interviews: Randall Meeks, Jeremy Scott, and Heather Farley. I knew what some might think, but they'd be wrong. Heather was very smart and a great writer and researcher. She had made the dean's list every semester, and her looks were just an extra plus. I found all 3 and set up interviews for the next morning. Then, I packed some books and notes into my briefcase and headed home. Hey! I heard from behind me as I unlocked my car door. Turning around, I saw Doug Morrissey jogging towards me. Wow! I said, noticing his clean-shaven face and slimmer figure. Looks like summer has been nice to you. He grinned. I finally decided to get moving again. That sounds like a good plan, I replied, trying my best to keep a friendly smile. His expression changed. What are you up to? It's over, I said. His eyes grew wide. So soon? Yeah, it happened a couple of weeks ago. He nodded, his expression turning serious. I've got Kyle. I said we would share custody, but he lives with me. You're kidding. I shook my head. The house is in my name, so she doesn't get anything from that. Our salaries are similar, so there's no extra support money. I let her keep a hidden retirement fund, which is really why there's no extra support money. Everything else is split equally. He gave a bitter laugh at that. I told you that Rebecca was good. She was. I said, so thanks. Really? I had no idea. She might have treated you badly, but he nodded to show he agreed. Tell me about it. She was something else. Like she could knock you down and still have control, he added. We both paused for a moment, thinking about it, I said, looking him up and down. Looks like you're finally moving on, though. I've met someone. Really? His head bounced up and a smile returned. She's great. Do I know her? He shrugged. Maybe. I laughed. What is this, middle school? You want me to pass her a note? You better tell me more. We'll see, he said, turning away, leaving me standing there. That was the first time I felt hope. Hope that things would improve and return to normal. Doug's divorce had been difficult, and he had been sad about it for a couple of years, but now he was almost back to his cheerful self. He looked much more like the happy, carefree guy I hadn't seen in 3 years. He had finally moved on. It felt good for me. For the first time, I believed what people said. One day I would get over my anger, regret, and sadness and be happy again. Of course, I thought as I parked in the garage, Doug hadn't been busy taking care of a little boy and his even smaller puppy. Heather Farley was there, sitting properly in her navy pants and white blouse. She looked more like a young professional than her usual lively self. What would your tasks be as you see them? I asked. Research and notes, she replied. Whatever subject you give me, I would research it thoroughly and write a summary of the main points. Clearly, there was a good reason she was a top candidate. She was much smarter than many of her peers. And considering how she dressed and acted, Jeremy had shown up to his interview in jeans and a t-shirt. She seemed a lot more mature, too. Have you talked to past interns? Absolutely, she replied. And you could probably work for Professor Whitman. I understand, she said. Her eyes locked onto mine, holding the look. But I don't want to work for him, I replied. He's the head of the department. It would look great on your resume for graduate school, she said. True, I admitted, but you'll soon be the head of history, so it might not matter. I leaned back in my chair. Do you know how tough this is? She gave me a mysterious smile and shrugged. I just know, she said. I looked at her, but she didn't look away. Her serious face surprised me. I had been in many meetings over the summer, and no one had mentioned that Hubert Whitman, a huge presence at Chadwick, was retiring. He had been teaching there since my parents were young. He was definitely old enough to retire, but most of us thought he would be working there forever. He was still very sharp and had more energy than many teachers younger than him, so it seemed strange to think he was leaving. "Okay," Heather finally said. "If you want to know, I'll tell you. But this is just between us, all right?" I nodded. "It's Professor Whitman," she continued. "I interviewed with him yesterday. He offered me a position but said I should meet with you. This might be his last semester, and he thinks you're likely to take over." "Is he okay?" I asked, surprised. "I mean, he's not sick or anything, right?" "I have no idea," she replied. "He seemed fine to me, just the same old Professor Whitman." I nodded. "And he already offered you a job?" I asked. "Heck, if you want to call it that," she said with a laugh. "It's mostly just cleaning up his files and organizing his notes. That's why he suggested I meet with you. He said anyone could do it, but I shouldn't miss out on the chance to get something valuable from this." I glanced at her resume, then back at her. She raised her eyebrow, waiting for my answer. "Okay, you're hired," I said. Suddenly she was all smiles, dropping her serious attitude. The position she was taking could really help with applications for graduate school. It was a big deal, and her excitement showed that. "Thanks, Professor," she said. "You won't regret it." "Really? Now, I want to hear your thoughts on the other two candidates," I said. "What do you think of Mr. Meeks and Mr. Scott?" "Definitely Mr. Meeks," she said right away. "Jeremy is smarter, but he's lazy. Randy works hard and writes better too. Jeremy tries to get by easily, but Randy really puts in the effort." I nodded, agreeing with her. I felt the same way. The issue with Jeremy Scott was that he had never really had to work for his grades. Everything had come too easily to him, and he wasn't used to putting in extra effort. "Well, Miss Farley," I said, standing up and reaching my hand out to her. "Welcome aboard." She shook my hand happily. "Thanks, Professor." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "I need you here tomorrow at 8:30. "No problem," she smiled. "What are we going to work on?" "Not sure yet," I lied. "We'll figure it out in the morning." She agreed, then gave a bright smile and walked out of the office. This semester was going to be a challenge if I had to see her walk by often. I was thinking about my day when the doorbell rang. "Your mom's here," I called from the backyard, then went to open the door. "Hi," Whitney said when I opened it. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. "Awkward," she said quietly, looking at the floor. She didn't look well. Her eyes were tired and her skin seemed pale. I lifted her chin with my hand. "Are you okay?" She looked up at me with a blank expression. "Sure." "You don't look so good." She glanced around the living room, which looked bare after our separation of belongings. "Do you need new furniture?" "Probably this weekend," I replied. "I'll go shopping while Kyle's with you." She nodded. Just then, Kyle came rushing from the kitchen toward her, with little Sonny trying to keep up. "Hey, Mom!" he shouted. She bent down and hugged him tightly, making Kyle squirm. He finally broke free enough to pick up the lively puppy. "This is Sun Tzu," Kyle said. "Isn't he great?" Whitney looked at me, then back to Kyle and the puppy. "We call him Sonny." Kyle held him out to Whitney, who took the little puppy in her hands and looked at him. "He's ugly," she said with a smile. "He's cool," Kyle insisted. "Really cool." She gave Sonny back to Kyle, who started making silly faces at the puppy, laughing as Sonny licked his cheeks. "So he finally got his dog," Whitney said, watching Kyle with the puppy. "It's helped," I said. "I see that." We watched for a moment, but then the quiet became uncomfortable. "Well, you two better get going," I suggested, noting her distant look. Jared nodded and she turned to me. "You'll have him back by 8 or so?" I asked. "Around that time," she replied. I reached out to take Sonny from Kyle. He handed the puppy over and took his mom's hand as they left. "What will we do now?" I wondered aloud, looking down at Sonny. The puppy yipped, reminding me that our plans for the evening should include dinner. I slid 2 copies of a book across my desk to Randy Meeks and Heather Farley. "Have either of you read this?" I asked. "I, Claudius," by Robert Graves. They picked up the books, looked at the covers, and then turned to read the description on the back. "Never heard of it," they said. Randy pushed up his glasses and ran his fingers through his messy hair. "Me neither," Heather said, looking confused. "It's about Claudius, a Roman emperor who died in 54 AD, and we need to research him." Randy looked puzzled. He preferred military history and likely imagined studying some famous battle. I shook my head. No, not Claudius or anyone else for that matter. I want you to read the book and figure out what we should look into. Choose something that isn't very well covered, I said. Heather glanced at the book again. Based on that? I nodded. Yes, read it all by Tuesday, and each of you send me a memo with your thoughts. And don't work together. So you want our own ideas? Randy asked, not showing any annoyance at this assignment during the Labor Day weekend. Exactly. I want you both to come up with a new way to see the change from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. Any part of that change? Randy asked. This book may not be traditional history, but it can help you see many things from the past that we don't normally study or even know. I noticed him glance at Heather, but she was already focused on the first page of the book, so I decided to leave them to it. I waved them off and Randy stood up to leave. Heather, however, remained seated, deeply absorbed in her reading. Miss Farley, I said. She looked up, breaking her focus. You don't have to do it here. You can go back to your dorm or apartment and work on it there. She frowned and shook her head. If it's all the same to you, I'd rather stay here. My roommates are back and getting settled. I won't be able to go to the library, she explained. She smiled brightly and I could see her sparkling green eyes. Here is fine. Randy glanced between us, then back at Heather. She had already leaned back into her book. We shared a knowing look. Women. Then he smiled, shook his head, and walked out. As Randy left, he said, See you on Tuesday. My last faculty meeting of the week was done. There was still no news about Professor Whitman and the possible opening for Dean of History. I didn't want to say anything to anyone, not wanting to hint that I knew something could change. The other professors, including Whitman, seemed to be going about their business as if nothing was different. Are you still here? I asked as I entered my office. Heather had moved from the chair to behind my desk, busy writing notes on a piece of paper. Yes, she said without looking up. I watched, amazed. It was clear she had finished most of the book, which was no small task, and her fast writing showed she had many ideas for research projects. Can I have my desk back? I asked, throwing my briefcase onto the chair she had been sitting in 2 hours earlier. She was busy writing something. After underlining a word 3 times, she looked up at me, her face showing surprise and excitement. Wow, how have I never heard of this book before? Good question, I said, moving behind her desk to glance at her notes. They were full of thoughtful questions. It's a classic, I mumbled. One of the best books of the 20th century, according to many people. Really? She said, moving my chair back and jumping up, quickly taking the notes before I could finish reading them. It's really inspiring, I guess, to think you can do something like this with a subject like that. Like what? She laughed. Roman history, professor? Come on. Have you ever studied anything so dry and boring? Before I could reply, she wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. This is going to be so much fun. I froze, worried about 3 things. First, that someone might walk in, and I'd get in trouble. Second, that the hug might last long enough for her to notice how nervous I felt. Third, I wanted this hug to last a bit longer because it felt nice. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off my worries, and stepped back from her. Fun, I agreed. She winked at me. Tons of fun, she confirmed, then packed the book and her notes into a backpack. Same time tomorrow? I wanted to answer but couldn't find my voice. She took my silence as a yes. Till then. She smiled and left the room with a confident stride that caught my attention. It was clear she knew the effect she had on me. She could make any guy feel this way, and she seemed to enjoy it. I didn't really want to go back to the office the next morning. Instead, I made 2 spare keys and left them with Sarah, the secretary. The next morning was bright and early with a long weekend ahead. I spent the time looking for ideas for living room and bedroom furniture. A few things were obvious. First, I wasn't too worried if my furniture matched. Second, I wasn't sure what decor even meant, let alone how to match it. Third, shopping for furniture felt just as bad as things I really didn't enjoy. Thankfully, I had the internet to help me out. There are a few furniture stores in Grant City, including some in the shopping mall on the edge of town. Instead of battling through the crowds the next day, I thought it would be better to check online first. I wanted to see what was available and get everything done without stepping out of my house. But 2 hours later, I found myself in trouble. It seemed that furniture, fabrics, styles, and colors were all in a secret language that only some could understand. I can speak 2 languages and read a bit of Latin and Greek, but I couldn't make sense of what they were explaining. The pictures were a little helpful, but not enough. So with a sigh, I gave up. My dog, Sun Tzu, was napping in his crate in the corner of the room. His soft snores, grunts, and little dreaming barks were quiet but comforting. I decided to check my email and then take a nap before Kyle got home. I had 4 emails waiting for me. Heather and Randy both wrote that they finished reading I, Claudius, and they hoped to send me their notes by Monday morning. I replied that Tuesday would work just fine. One email was a strange offer about a product that was a bit insulting. But it was the 4th email that made me wish I had paid more attention to the other offers. This message was from Claude Law at Link TechNet, and the subject was Saturday. I opened it, not knowing what to expect. The message said, "I know you're still upset with me, but I hope we can move past that. What's done is done. Now that things are calmer, would you like to grab a drink together? We can still be friends, or more." Reading this brought back all the pain of the past 5 months. I knew I would see Whitney with other people eventually. We both needed to move on. It was pointless to pretend otherwise. But this felt different. It reminded me of the big question. What happened to my marriage? I read the message again and again, but it didn't give me any answers. Now I had an email address to check if I wanted to find out more. I leaned back, feeling tense as I tried to decide whether I should look into this further. Then I had a thought that changed my mind. How did this email end up in my inbox? It was actually sent to the email address that Whitney and I used to share. The answer came quickly. Whitney had created a new email account. She made a new account with a name similar to ours. I logged out of my account and started the login process again. I typed Patterson 123 into the computer on Link DevNet. I looked at it for a moment, then changed it to Patterson 1234 on LinkNet. I entered my password. Honestly, any password should work, but it said invalid email address. I removed the last number and stared again. It must be close to our actual email. There was no way they were using our home email. I checked our email so often that it would be too risky to use our own address. But surely the fake one was similar enough. Just one letter or number off could send the email to our regular address. After 5 minutes, I finally got it. Patterson 123 on Link DevNet. That small underline made all the difference. Now I had a real address. It was time to find the password. I tried everything I could think of. Her name, my name, family names, and even old nicknames. I tried birth dates, social security numbers, anniversary dates, and old phone numbers. Nothing worked. The message always said, invalid password. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 3 and Cal would be home soon. Then I noticed a little brass nameplate on my desk. The paperweight I had given to Whitney when she won her first big case. It said super lawyer. I remembered how excited she was when I gave it to her, how she placed it proudly on her desk many years ago. Now it was just sitting there, dusty and forgotten in the corner of my den. I wondered how long it had been since she took it out of her office. Turning back to the screen, I typed in super lawyer, all in lowercase, and it worked. I clicked on the history of deleted messages and found a list going back 11 months. "Dad!" Carl shouted as he came in through the front door, slamming it behind him. "Hey, Dad!" he said, rushing into the room toward the animal crate. "Hey, Sonny!" The puppy was already up and barking happily at Kyle, wagging his tail fast. "Come on!" Kyle said as he opened the crate and ran back out. The puppy followed right after him. I looked at the list of emails that were printing as Kyle dashed through the door. Then, I clicked on a message dated March 19th, 2010. It was the night Kyle and I had stayed awake, eating pizza and watching movies, while Whitney sat quietly on the couch. It happened just a few hours after I told her I wanted a divorce. "I know this is hard for you," I wrote to her. "You've been so unhappy for a long time. You feel guilty and sad about how your marriage has turned out. You worry about how this will affect your little boy. I really wanted to hold you close today and comfort you, especially as I know you're feeling confused and unsure about leaving him for good. Just think how happy we'll all be together. You, Kyle and me. I want this more than anything, and I'm sure you do too. We'll be the happiest family when that day comes. I thought she had met him that day, but they hadn't been together in that way. At least not that day. The email suggested that their relationship had progressed by then, but I saw her reply to sealed law that came in the next morning. She wrote that Luke told her it was over. Luke is divorcing me. We are telling Carl later today. I don't know what to do. Last night we had pizza and watched movies until Kyle fell asleep on Luke's lap. You wouldn't believe how peaceful they looked. Watching them made me realize something important. You and I don't share what Luke and I have, and we probably never will. I don't know what I've been doing for these past 2 months, but it needs to stop. I don't want to see you again, Dad. Kyle stood in the doorway and asked what was wrong. I tried to smile. Nothing, little man. I closed the email and picked up the stack of printed messages. Just let me put this away, and I'll come out and play with you and Sonny. His face lit up with joy. Hurry, he said, running back outside. I locked the emails in a drawer and went into the backyard to join Kyle and the Romesco family, all having fun with Sonny. The poor pup seemed to be overwhelmed by 5 kids chasing him, throwing things for him, and giving him lots of love. He looked tired from all the attention. Good idea, Sally said from behind me. It's definitely taking his mind off things. She put a hand on my shoulder. It'll get better, you know. It might take time, but it will. I covered her hand with mine. Thanks. She smiled and handed me a cold can of beer. It's Friday night, let's relax. We both enjoyed our drinks and chatted while keeping an eye on the kids running around with little Sonny. Did you feed him yet? Whitney asked as she carried Kyle's bag shortly after 6. No, I figured you'd want to take him out for a bit. Just something quiet at the apartment, she replied. It's been a long week. I nodded, not wanting to talk much. She knew classes were starting soon after Labor Day, and she also knew Kyle hadn't eaten yet because he asked her where they were going as soon as she arrived. No furniture yet, she said, looking around at the empty room and kitchen. Then she turned to me and gave a small smile. That's right, you told me that. Kyle ran back into the room and stopped at the couch. Sun Tzu, the dog, was lying down, resting from playing with Sonny earlier. Kyle said he had petted the dog and given him a gentle kiss on the nose before jumping up and running over to me for a hug. Have a good weekend, Dad, he said, squeezing me tightly. I love you. I love you too, I replied. He took Whitney's hand and she led him to the door. Have a good weekend, Luke, Whitney said. You too, I replied. Then, feeling bitter, I added, super lawyer. She paused, turned back to me, and looked at me for a moment. The look on my face must have shown what I was feeling because she dropped her shoulders, nodded, and took Kyle to her car. 4 hours and 3 beers later, I figured a few things out. First, Whitney had lied. She had been with him at least 6 times. Second, he was definitely a lawyer, and his work email was hidden. Third, there was a law firm in nearby Sherman Oaks named Cahill, Levine, and Dunleavy with 9 lawyers, 7 of whom were men. Their website didn't list an email address. Fourth, he really pursued her hard, and it had taken months for Whitney to give in. Fifth, even though he kept trying, she did not go back to him after her email from March 26th. Except for a few comments from him about how I didn't care about her feelings and dreams, I wasn't sure what I had done wrong. Not one of Whitney's emails had anything bad to say about me. I felt like an afterthought in most of them, especially her email from March 20th. That one felt like a memory from a happy time, like a nice childhood Christmas. But there were still things I didn't know. First, who was he? Neither of them had said his name in their messages. Second, how did this start? Sure, he chased her, but I didn't know if she had shown any signs that she was available. Third, when did I stop being Whitney's husband and the love of her life and turn into just a memory? When did she stop loving me and why? What had I done wrong? It was almost 11, and I was ready for bed. Then a thought struck me, and I decided to check something. I logged back into the secret email account and looked at the history. They were all deleted now. There was one message still in the inbox, and it was unopened. The subject line simply said, "Luke, I'm so sorry." I left it unopened, closed my email, and went to bed. I didn't care. Let her wonder if I had read it. By 9:30 Saturday morning, I was feeling really bored. Poor Sun Tzu had already been taken for a long walk. It felt like we walked 11 miles. I had finished reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. My breakfast of grapefruit and toast only took 10 minutes. I had some time to spare until the stores opened at 10 in the park. "I'll take you with me," I said to Sun Tzu. He tried his best to ignore me and hide. I promised him, "I'll carry you." I finally caught him and held him under one arm, while I grabbed his little cage with the other. He seemed a bit happier when I put his cage on the passenger seat. I placed him in the cage and walked around to the driver's side. By the time I started the car, Sonny was already snoring. 5 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of Veterans Park. A few people were already there. Some were jogging on the paths, and a few mothers were pushing their kids on the swings. "Come on," I said, waking up the pup and holding him in my arms. We strolled around the park, and Sun Tzu was happy to nestle in my arms, giving sleepy looks to joggers who passed by. It was a warm morning and the walk felt nice. It was much better than sitting in the living room, staring at the walls and listening to silence. As we got closer to the swings and the joyful sounds of children, Sonny's ears perked up. He pushed himself up in my arms, looking for the kids. When he saw them, he started yapping, and his little tail began to wag excitedly against my chest. I was watching Sonny and the kids, smiling, when I noticed someone. She looked up and saw me at the same moment, and I froze. "Hey!" Kristen called, waving as she pushed a little boy on the swing. I lifted my head to greet her, just watching for a moment. She seemed relaxed and happy with the boy, enjoying the simple joy of pushing him on the swing. I admired her calmness with her child. After a few minutes of watching, the little boy jumped off the swing, rolled in the grass, and got up smiling at me. "Can I see your puppy, mister?" he asked, running over with a big grin. "Sure," I said, bending down to let the pug out. "Come here, boy," I said. "His name's Sun Tzu." "Sonny," he said. "I know. My friend told us about him." He was petting the dog, who seemed to enjoy the boy's attention much more than mine all morning. "That's what they say," Kristen said, walking over. "Snails and puppy dog tails. That's what little boys are made of." "I can't remember it," I replied, feeling a bit lonely this weekend. I nodded, and she gave me a sympathetic smile. "It takes some getting used to." "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." She bent down and petted Sonny, who mostly ignored her, wanting more of the boy's rough and playful touch. "So, is this 2 Saturdays in a row?" I asked. "Are you following me?" "Just passing time until the stores open," I mumbled, and then decided to change the subject. "Ben is your son," she said, standing up and looking at him the whole time. "So you're feeling like I do?" She turned to me, her expression hard to read, and nodded. "Pretty much. But at least you have the weekend, right?" She shook her head. "I'm taking him to his dad's in about 20 minutes. I nodded, not sure what else to ask. She was really beautiful and seemed nice. With my loneliness and feeling cut off from others except for Doug, I wanted to know her better. But I wasn't sure how to start. "So, what are your plans for the weekend?" she asked, pulling me out of my thoughts. She looked curious again. "Furniture shopping? Really?" She laughed. "A man shopping for furniture?" I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Like lunch?" Her eyes narrowed. "Was that too much?" I let my words fade away. The smile returned. "So you want help with furniture shopping? And I get lunch in return?" Before I could respond, she answered herself. "Okay," she said. "Sounds like a plan." I offered to buy lunch. She shook her head. "No way. I spoke up and you called me on it. Fair is fair." She seemed like a woman of her word. I was glad to have company on what would have been a lonely day. "So where do you live?" she asked. "Winston Hill, number 715. She looked at her watch, then at Ben and the pug. "Okay. How about I drop Ben off at his dad's and meet you back at your place in about half an hour? I can take a quick look around your house to see what you need. Then we can go shopping." "Sounds good," I said, wondering how much cleaning I could do before she came. 30 minutes, she said, reaching for Ben. "Come on, honey, it's time to go." I picked up the pug and followed them to the parking lot. The house might not pass a strict inspection, but it was clean enough for a regular visitor. "You need furniture," Kristen said, leaning against the doorway and looking into my empty room. "Where do you sleep?" On the sofa in the den, I said. It turns into a bed. That sounds comfy, she replied with a laugh. Let's go. 3 hours later, the furniture shopping was almost over. To my surprise, Kristen picked out some nice items that I liked. At least there were no floral patterns, and the colors were mostly browns and burgundies. Okay, she said as we left the furniture store. Recliners, an entertainment center, dresser, and coffee tables are all set. Just the bed left. Want to grab burgers? I asked. Sleep comfort, she replied. It's a bit pricey, but worth it. We went out to look at inflatable beds, which I had never heard of before. Lay on this one, she said, stretching out on one side of a huge king-sized bed. I lay down on the other side. It felt nice, but a bit soft. Watch this, the sales lady said, and pressed a button on a remote. I heard a noise, and soon the bed felt as solid as a rock. Cool, Kristen said, turning to me with a big smile. Her smile and shining eyes amazed me. Very, I replied. But the king size? Can I just get a... No way, she insisted. Then her face softened. You'll find someone else, Luke. You really will. I nodded. Then she smiled again. And when you do, she continued, you don't want her taking all the space on the bed, right? I grinned back. Right, I said, and she jumped off the bed. I wished I had picked the smaller bed instead, the one that would make Kristen curl up next to me. You'll need a headboard, she said. This bed comes with its own frame, but you need to make or buy a headboard. You can get a king-size bed frame to put this in too, the sales lady suggested. Kristen shook her head. Tyler's dad can build you one. He does woodworking. It'll be ready when this is delivered. Tyler's dad? I asked. My father-in-law. He knows the right sizes too. He's made some before, she said. I nodded, thinking that's fair enough. We then spent the next 10 minutes finishing up the delivery details and paying for the bed. Before I knew it, we were in the mall's hallway, surrounded by people. All done. My house will be furnished in just a few hours, I said. Lunch? I suggested. Something light, she replied. I'll pay, I assured her. It's not that, I'm just not that hungry, she said. Me neither. But if we don't eat something, we'll be starving soon. Kristen looked me up and down as if deciding something, then smiled and linked her arm with mine. Come on, hero, she said, pulling me along. I know just the place. 15 minutes later, we parked outside a small bakery on the main street. How have I never noticed this place? I wondered, getting out of the car. You're not from here, she said, leading me inside the little bakery. It's a well-kept secret, she added. A kind woman with gray hair, nice glasses, and a white apron smiled at us as we approached the counter. 5 minutes later, we sat at a tiny table in the corner enjoying fresh croissants and hot espresso. How did I miss this place? I asked. Kristen smiled. I told you have to grow up here to find these little spots. So why don't you tell me about yourself? I hesitated, afraid to meet her eyes as I spoke. What do you want to know? I finally looked up and her smile was warm and easy. I just know you're a teacher and that you were married to a man named Tyler, I said. Tyler Collins, she corrected with the same smile. He was my first husband. My second husband was a police officer, but that marriage didn't last long. Ben is Tyler's son. Randy is my second husband, but we didn't have any kids. She laughed lightly. That marriage barely lasted long enough to open all the wedding gifts. Kristen shared her story about her two husbands. She had grown alone and restless with Tyler, left him in Florida, and returned to Illinois. Randy had also been married, but things ended badly between them. She mentioned how she had begged Tyler for another chance, but he married his editor instead. They had spent the last 5 years focusing on raising Ben and dating now and then. There are questions, she said softly when she finished her story. I stopped and looked at her. This isn't a police interview, Kristen, I said. I know, but I've made some really big mistakes. Mistakes that hurt a lot of people, not just Tyler and Randy, but also Ben, my family, and others. Did you want to hurt them on purpose? I asked, curious. She shrugged. It doesn't really change what happened. The truth is, I did hurt them. Because of my actions, they all suffered. Why I did it doesn't matter. What matters is that it happened. And you don't think they share any of the blame? I pressed. Tyler? Maybe a bit, she said. But I put him in a tough spot. Randy deserves more blame. Still, everything happened because of my choices. If I had thought things through better, I like to think I wouldn't have made those choices. But I'm not sure. She shook her head. That's not the case at all. So what's different now? I asked, surprised I even asked the question. She began walking again. That's all, Luke. Come on. You have Kyle. Put yourself in my shoes. Would you make those choices if it meant putting him through pain? I didn't want him to face even one divorce, I said. No, she replied, her voice matching my feelings. If I had known I was pregnant, I wouldn't have left. I would have told Tyler the truth and asked for his forgiveness. I would have tried to keep our family together. Do you think he would have forgiven you? I asked, curious about her thoughts. I like to believe he would have. He was always a nice guy, he still is. You sound like you might still care for him. Sure, why not? He's Ben's dad and he really is a great guy, but he's moved on. He has a new wife now and they have a little girl too. So yes, I still care about him, but it's more like a fond love. A comfortable love, not a burning passion. I've let that go. Our time together has passed. Even if it came back, I wouldn't get back on board. I was quiet, and she didn't say anything else until we were in the car, driving back to my place. What's on your mind? She asked. I don't know, I replied, looking at the road. I can't help but think that maybe Whitney, my ex, didn't really think this through. I don't know, Kristen said, putting her hand on my arm. It sounds like she changed her mind at the end, like she wanted to do what I wish I could have done. Make things right and try to spend the rest of her life making up for it. I glanced at Kristen and then focused back on the road. There's just one thing missing, I said. I know she didn't want to be honest along the way. Exactly. We pulled into the driveway beside her car and I turned off the engine. Luke, Kristen said, looking at me, if she had been honest with you from the start, would you have forgiven her? I thought for a moment and shrugged. I guess we'll never know. I had asked Kristen to dinner for that night, but she decided to have dinner with her family instead. She promised to call me the next day, and I told her I'd be waiting. So my first Saturday night alone was just puppy food for Sun Tzu and a bowl of soup for me. I watched 5 episodes of Band of Brothers. I put the puppy in his crate, went back to the couch, and fell asleep. One of the hardest parts of getting older is that I can't sleep more than 6 hours a night. As a teenager, I could stay in bed until almost 11 on weekends. At West Point, that changed completely. I had to get up at 4:30 every morning. That's pretty early for anyone not used to military time. The rest of my time in the Army was filled with short naps. After the Army, I enjoyed sleeping until at least 8 or 9 most weekend mornings and got at least 8 hours of sleep almost every night. Now, though, when I really needed to sleep away the empty feeling in my house, it was impossible. You think I could sleep now? Not a chance. So there I was at 5:30, walking a clearly annoyed puppy around the block for the 4th time. A few hundred yards into the 5th trip, a tall, older man in his pajamas and a bathrobe was waiting for me on his porch. You shouldn't be doing that, he called out. I stopped and turned to him. Doing what? I asked. He nodded down at the puffing puppy. Waking him up so often. Pugs, you know how they are. He smiled a friendly smile. Because I'm a vet. I looked down at my dog, Sun Tzu, then back at the man on the porch as I picked him up. I walked over to the front porch. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean to be rude. The man looked at me for a moment, then at the puppy snuggled in my arms. I'm Alan Lacroix, he said, reaching out to pat the dog. He seemed around 70 years old, tall and thin, with a bald head and a gray ring of hair. He wore reading glasses. His arms, though, were strong-looking. I'm Luke Patterson, I replied. Pugs have short and soft palates, he said, looking me in the eye, so they can struggle to breathe. That's why they snore loudly and wheeze. In hot weather, they can get tired and too hot very easily, so watch him carefully today. He went on, make sure you give him plenty of water when you get home. You should check his paw pads, too. They might be swollen. I remembered, but I only took him out for a short walk around the block today, I said. He replied, I saw you walked him for almost an hour yesterday. That's probably 2.5, maybe 3 miles. I noticed that while I was reading by the window, he said. You could really tire him out if you keep this up. I nodded, scared by what I could have done. I didn't know, he said with a smile. Most new pet owners don't. Someone should have warned you, but they didn't. Now I'm telling you. Water. Get him water as soon as you get home, and you should carry him there. See how he's panting so much? He was panting, but he was also looking up at me with love and trust. I felt ashamed and said, I promise. Okay, Luke Patterson, he replied. You need to know this. How do you know I'm a new pet owner? I asked. He laughed. Because you're letting the dog lead instead of the other way around. Next time you walk him, keep him close to your side. If he tries to pull ahead, pull him back. With that harness, you won't hurt him. You'll just show him who is in charge. He chuckled again, then waved goodbye as he went back inside. I walked home, filled a big bowl with cold water for Sonny, and set him down. He drank about half the bowl quickly, and his panting started to get better. I'm sorry, boy, I said, petting him when he was done. He wagged his tail and then lay down in the living room. I spent the next hour calming my shaking hands. How would I have explained to Kyle if something happened to his dog? Things were already hard for him. I almost let his dog get too tired. I couldn't believe it. By 9, I decided to go grocery shopping. Do you know how boring life has to be before grocery shopping becomes the best part of your day? I was in the vegetable section when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Hey, Professor, Heather Farley said as she reached in and knocked the zucchini out of my hands. Don't buy that, it's bad. I turned to her and laughed. Good morning, Miss Farley. She smiled brightly, and so did the shorter girl next to her. Morning, Professor Patterson, she said in a playful tone. All right, we're not in class. Call me Luke, and you can call each other by your first names, I replied. And me? The other girl asked. That's Brandy, Heather said. Got it. I turned back to the zucchini. What's so bad about zucchini? Not the zucchini, just that one, Heather said. Okay, I'm curious. What's wrong with that zucchini? She looked at me like I was joking. It's terrible. It's grown with chemicals, picked too early, ripened with gas, and who knows how old it is. Get it? She explained. I nodded slowly. And look around, Brandy jumped in. You're in the Midwest. Drive down any road and you'll find fresh farm stands within 5 miles. It's better, fresher, and tastier for you, Heather added. I looked at both girls. They seemed to share a passion for long conversations and fresh food. Melons are in season, Heather mentioned with a cheeky smile. They sell fresh meat too, Brandy said. Heather nodded, agreeing with her. You can buy meat here, but not good bread. There's a bakery on Winstead Street, do you know it? I nodded. I just went there yesterday for the first time. They exchanged knowing looks. That's the best place, Heather encouraged. Come on, follow us, we'll help. I think I can manage, I said. Yeah, right, Brandy laughed, rolling her eyes at Heather, who did the same. So I spent the next half hour being shown around the store, buying only a few things like milk, coffee, pasta, meat, and some frozen vegetables, but only if they were out of season. Surprisingly, it was fun. Heather and Brandy chatted nonstop about classes, teachers, boys, and more. Once we were done shopping and outside in the parking lot, Heather asked, Do you want to come with us to some farm stands? I smiled and said, No thanks. I'm sure I can manage now. Heather gave me a playful look. What's the matter, Professor? Afraid to be alone with the two of us for too long? Yeah, Professor, Brandy joined in, hugging Heather close. You don't think you can handle it? I felt my face get hot from a mix of embarrassment and a little excitement. I tried to speak, but they both started giggling. Okay then, Heather said with a smile that showed she had some fun ideas. What if you change your mind? You've got my email. I just managed to wave back. An hour later, with fresh bread, croissants, and some veggies from a farm stand a little way out of town, I was back in my kitchen putting my groceries away. There were no messages, and I felt a bit let down. Then my phone rang. I was wondering when you would call, I said as I answered. There was a pause. Then Whitney spoke up. Oh, were you expecting someone? I felt a bit deflated. Yeah, kinda. What's up, Whit? I was hoping to bring Kyle back today instead of tomorrow like we planned, she said. Is something wrong? I asked. She paused again. Well, he's pretty bored and misses his puppy. Plus, I have a big trial starting on Tuesday, so I want to get an early start on my prep. I thought about it for a moment. wondering if this would mess up any plans Kristen might have for Luke. "Sorry," I said. "When were you thinking of bringing him back?" I asked. "Now," she replied. I looked at the clock. It wasn't even 11 yet. "Sure, that's fine. I'll be here." "Thanks, Luke," she said. Then, after a small pause, she added, "I hope I'm not messing up your plans." "I'll deal with it," I said quickly. "See you soon." I hung up. No goodbye. No, I love you. Just hung up. Kristen called right after Whitney dropped off Kyle. He was in the backyard playing with Sonny when the phone rang. "Hello?" "Good morning, Luke," Kristen said. "So, do you have any plans for today?" I sighed. "Whitney brought Kyle back a day early," she laughed. "Welcome to the club. Better get used to it." "This happens to you a lot?" I asked. "Not too much sometimes," she said. "And sometimes I ask Tyler to babysit if I have a date or something." I thought about how often she might go out on dates. "You still there?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm still here." "Do you want to get out of the house today? Do you have something in mind?" "I do," she said. "Think you can handle being around my ex-husband and his new wife?" "Wait, what?" She laughed. "Tyler invited me over for a cookout, a Labor Day party. I mentioned I might bring a date, and he was fine with it." "Okay, but Kyle can come, right?" "Of course. Ben will be there with a bunch of other kids, and Tyler has a pool for them. You won't feel out of place." "No, this doesn't happen a lot, but it happens enough that everyone is comfortable. We're not best friends, but we get along for Ben's sake. And we have a lot of friends in common. It's not so awkward anymore." I looked out at Kyle, saw that Sonny was getting tired and needed a nap, and figured I had nothing better to do. "Okay." I wanted to see Kristen in a swimsuit, so I asked if I should bring my swim trunks. She laughed and said, "If you want to swim, are you bringing a swimsuit?" I replied, "You'll just have to come along and see." An hour later, Kyle and I had our swim trunks and towels packed in a duffel bag. We picked up Kristen in front of her neat little house with a lovely lawn. She opened the door before I could ring the bell. "Come in for a minute," she said. "You can help me carry some things." "Did I need to bring anything?" I asked, following her through her tidy living room into a small kitchen. She wore shorts and a sleeveless top, and I admired her fit legs. "Not really," she said, unplugging a slow cooker and motioning for me to take it. "If you want, we can stop for drinks on the way," she offered. "Okay," I replied. She grabbed her own bag and purse. "Sorry, no time for a tour now. Maybe next time?" I looked around once more as I followed her outside. "It's nice here," I said. "Yeah," she agreed. "Cozy and simple. Who takes care of your yard?" I asked as she opened the back door of my car and Kyle said hi to her. "I do it all myself," she said, placing her things in the back seat and then taking the slow cooker from me to put on the floor. "It keeps me busy when Ben's with his dad." "It's really nice," I said, opening her door. "Thanks," she replied with a bright smile as she got in and buckled her seatbelt. An hour later, I had met most of the adults at the party, including Tyler Collins and his wife, Marissa. Marissa was a rising science fiction writer, and I heard they were friendly and easy to talk to. Their home was nice, but not too big, sitting on a 5-acre lot surrounded by ancient oak trees. "So, you were in the Army," Tyler said. I nodded. "I got out in '92. "What did you do?" Marissa asked. She was tall and had a sly smile that made her interesting to talk to. "I was in the infantry," I said. "I was a platoon leader." She nodded and Kristen jumped in. "Kyle said he's some kind of war hero." Tyler raised an eyebrow at that. "War hero?" I chuckled and replied, "I just made it through Desert Storm, Kuwait and Iraq." "Did you see battle?" Marissa asked. I hesitated but then nodded. "And you did something heroic?" she pressed. "Not really, just doing my duty," I replied. Marissa's sly smile returned and she looked at me closely. "Are we going to have to get you to tell us the whole story?" I felt their curious eyes on me, wanting to hear a big tale of bravery and honor, but I knew it wouldn't make sense to them. No one was there before, and you really needed to be there, Marissa. My doubts were holding me back, but you helped me out. "Tyler, you can learn something," she said, still looking my way. "And what's that?" I asked playfully. "Mystery can be good, but I write mysteries." She meant not to reveal everything about a person, saying sometimes it's better to keep things private. He laughed. "And me? Am I an open book?" I watched them, nervous about the sudden tension. but her teasing smile was now aimed at him. Her soft eyes showed that she cared for him just the way he was, and the way he gently touched her arm showed he felt her love too. "Not about you, Tyler. I mean in your stories. Keep some secrets and let the readers guess. Don't reveal everything in the end." He nodded, looking from Marissa to Kristen and then to me. Suddenly, his smile was wide. "My toughest critic." Kristen spoke up during the quiet moment. "Is anyone going to jump in the pool? How about you?" Marissa was asking me. When I didn't answer right away, Kristen gave me a playful smile. "I'll only go in if you do." I glanced at Tyler and Marissa, who both had funny grins. Then I looked back at Kristen. I really wanted to see her in that swimsuit, so I figured I'd just embrace it. "Where do I change?" I asked. "Follow me," Kristen said, taking my hand with a smile. "If you take more than 5 minutes, we'll start to worry," Tyler joked, raising his eyebrows. Kristen laughed back at him. "Just use Ben's room. I'll change in the hallway." "Such a spoil sport," Marissa teased. 5 minutes later, with a towel around my waist, I walked back to the backyard of the house. "I've never seen legs like yours," Kristen said, laughing. "They look like a ghost's." Someone next to Tyler chimed in. "Why the towel?" Marissa asked. "Wearing something funny under there?" I looked at her, then at Kristen and the others, and took the towel off my waist. They tried to keep calm, but some gasps slipped out. "As I mentioned," I explained, looking down at the scars on my right leg, which ran from my hip to near my knee. "I didn't duck in time." Kristen stepped closer, gently tracing the scars with her fingers. "I'd prefer if you didn't do that just now," I said softly. "Something might happen that I wouldn't want." That broke the tension, and everyone laughed. Then Tyler suggested we go back inside to change some more if anyone needed it, while others pointed to a corner of the pool away from the kids. Kristen seemed fine, but I felt myself turning red. "Tyler, look at that. Someone's got a crush," he laughed. "Tyler," Marissa warned, giving him a look. "Sorry," he grinned, still chuckling. "Go on, you two. Can you watch the kids for a bit? We're going to start grilling," I asked. He nodded but said, "No, I don't need help. Just go enjoy yourself." After about half an hour in the pool, I was mostly dodging splashes and jumps from a bunch of kids. Karen and I were sitting on the edge with our feet in the water. "Does it hurt?" she asked, looking at the kids. "The warm water feels nice," I replied. "Is that why Kyle calls you a hero?" "No," I said, turning to her. She wore a one-piece suit, and she looked nice in it. When Kyle saw my scars, he asked about them. "Does he know what they're from?" "He knows as much as you do." "What about anyone else, besides Whitney and your family?" "Nope, that's about it. I never told my family." She seemed to understand why I kept it quiet. She hesitated before asking another question. "So, are you a hero?" "That's hard to say," I replied. She looked at me intently. "Does the Army see you that way?" I nodded. "Yeah, I got a medal for it." "Medals? Like the Purple Heart?" "Yeah, it's one of the higher ones." "What did you get?" "Silver Star." "Is that important?" I shrugged. "It's the third highest." She smiled and raised an eyebrow. "So I guess you're really a hero then?" I chuckled. "No, just someone who was too stubborn to back down." I noticed her coming closer, and then she kissed me. It wasn't a deep kiss or anything romantic, just a gentle touch of her lips against mine. It felt electric, but it ended before I could respond. Then I looked around. No one seemed to have seen us, not even Kyle. "Don't worry," she whispered. "He wasn't watching." I smiled back, glad she didn't think I was rejecting her. "I always wanted to kiss a hero," she said. "Is that all you wanted to do with a hero?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her smile turned playful. "Maybe if it's the right hero, not just any hero." "Are there many heroes around here?" I teased. She laughed. "Good point." By 6:30, I began to think about little Sun Tzu. He usually slept a lot when Kyle wasn't around, but he still needed to eat. Plus, I was ready to relax after a filling meal of chicken, coleslaw, beans, and potato salad. Just then, Kyle said, "But Dad, Ben wants me to spend the night." I glanced at Kristen, who just shrugged. Marissa walked over and said, "Sorry, Ben asked a couple of hours ago. It's fine with us if it's okay with you." I looked from her to Kyle, then to little Ben, who was waiting eagerly. He was 10 feet away. Then I looked back at Marissa. I didn't know them at all. But how dangerous could two writers really be? Are you sure it's okay? I asked. She smiled back at me. Ben wants him to stay, and we've got plenty of space. What time should I pick him up tomorrow? I asked. Kyle jumped with joy, and Ben raised his fist in excitement. Kristen laughed, and Marissa smiled wider. We'll bring him over to your place around noon. Thanks, she said. Thank you, I replied. She waved it away and hugged me, thanking me for visiting. Then I spent 5 minutes reminding Kyle about manners and being respectful at someone else's house, just like my parents always did with me. During my little speech, he rolled his eyes, eager to get back to the pool. Most of the drive home was peaceful. It got even easier when Kristen took my free hand and rested it on her thigh near her knee. I glanced at her, but she was looking straight ahead, a small smile on her face. Want to grab a drink somewhere before you drop me off? She asked. That sounds nice, I replied. Can I stop by the house to feed Sonny and let him out for a bit? Sure, she said. 5 minutes later, Sonny was out of his cage and running around the backyard, sniffing everything before marking his spot on the grass. Got a beer? Kristen asked from the deck. Sure, I said, heading to the fridge. I grabbed 2 bottles of Amstel Light, opened them, and handed one to her. She took a long drink from her beer. What's wrong? I asked. Just getting ready, she said. Ready for what? I wondered. She took another big sip and giggled softly. Sorry, I chuckled, then took a long drink from my own beer. Do you need a bit of courage too? She asked. I'm not sure yet. I thought if you needed it, I might as well. Oh, really? Really? Then let's see if we need it, she said, placing her beer on the railing. She turned to me, then glanced at my beer. Does this mean? I started, putting my bottle down too. She nodded and stepped closer, leaning in to kiss me. It wasn't a light kiss this time. It was a gentle kiss, a little more pressure than before. Her hands ran softly through my hair, and I wrapped my arms around her, enjoying the moment. After about a minute, she pulled back and looked at me. Thanks. I think that should be my line, I murmured. That was nice. It was amazing, she smiled, but it wasn't a look that suggested she wanted to go further. Did I pass the test? I asked. She looked at my face to see if there was anything else behind my words, but there wasn't. Then she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. This isn't an audition. It's something I've wanted to do since last week. Then why didn't you? I asked. I wasn't sure if I liked you enough. Remember what I said? I nodded. We have kids now. There's no point in rushing into something that might hurt them. She nodded back, seeming relieved that I understood. I'm sorry if you want more right now, but I just can't take that chance. Getting close too soon just complicates things. It changes people, I added. It makes them possessive, I said. And too eager, too quickly, I think. What do you mean? I mean, if we get close too soon, then you might just become a rebound. That's not what either of us wants. She thought about that for a moment, her lips tightening and her gaze drifting to the side. Did I say something wrong? I asked. She turned back to me and smiled. No, Luke, not at all. But her smile seemed forced, and I noticed her sudden worry. You know, I whispered, just because you are the first one after my divorce doesn't mean you'll be a rebound. If we do this right, and assuming we still like each other in a few months, there's no reason we can't become best friends first. If we get more serious later, great. If not, it won't be because of any past. It'll just be how things are. Her eyes sparkled with tears, but her smile showed that I had said the right thing. Wow, you're really smart. No wonder you're a professor, she said, leaning in to give me another kiss. This one lasted longer than the first, and it only ended when our dog, Sun Tzu, started yapping and jumping around at our feet. Ouch! What was that? I said, pulling away from the kiss. That little guy just nipped my ankle. She laughed, then took a sip of her beer. Let's feed him and then go get that drink. Sounds good, I replied. Later, at 11:30 the next morning, Kyle burst through the front door and ran straight to Sonny, his tail wagging as he saw his big brother. They raced out to the backyard to play. Hello? I heard someone call. I walked from the kitchen to the living room and saw Tyler Collins at the door. I just wanted to check if anyone was home, he said. Come on in, have a beer or a soda, I offered. He smiled, shrugged, and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Did they behave?" I asked. "Sure," he replied. "They had a lot of fun, but they might need a nap. They didn't fall asleep on the couch until after midnight." I chuckled. "The joys of sleepovers. What do you want to drink?" I opened the refrigerator for him to see. "Just a Diet Pepsi, please." I pulled out two and handed one to him. He popped the top, took a sip, and placed the can on the counter while leaning against it. "So, what's it like to be a best-selling author?" I asked him. He chuckled and said it's busier than you might think. There's writing and then editing, and even more editing. And that's all after coming up with an idea for the story and doing some research first, of course. On top of that, there are meetings about movie scripts. If the book sells, then there are book tours, talk shows, and all sorts of things to help sell the book. "Sounds really busy," I said. "Much busier than I would have thought," he agreed. He took a drink and asked about me. "What's it like being a history professor?" I told him it's about 9 hours of teaching each week and maybe 18 hours for everything else. That includes preparing classes and grading papers. I also spend about 9 hours a week in office hours to meet with students and a few hours in faculty meetings. "Not so bad," he said. I added that there's also research and writing on my own, usually with help from student interns. You know, work for history journals and sometimes a small book. That takes maybe another 15 hours a week. "Okay," he said, holding up his hands. "Now we are reaching the line between busy and too much." I shrugged. "It's not so bad. I can do lots of it from home, like preparing for class and writing, and it doesn't really matter when I do it. Especially now, since he looked at me, heard my words, and noticed my expression. He seemed to finish my thoughts before saying, "Yeah, that's how I started writing." I thought about how to ask the next question, but he saw the look on my face and smiled. "So you and Kristen are friends for now, right?" "Good idea," he said as I explained. When Kristen left me, I felt lost or worse. "So you think it's best to take it slow, to really get to know each other, talk a lot about what you both want in life and what you like and don't like, and all the little stuff that can become a big deal?" "Sure," I agreed, taking a sip. I wasn't sure how to continue the conversation. Tyler's face was easy to read, so I just said it. "She told me what happened between you two." He nodded. "It was pretty bad. But she says she's changed now and would never do that again." His eyes narrowed as he looked at me seriously. "Did she say why? That she couldn't put Ben through anything like that again?" He nodded. "That explains a lot." "Like what?" "Like how she has lived since Randy divorced her." He emptied his drink and set the can upside down in the sink before crossing his arms. "She used to be very selfish, Luke. Sorry, but that's the truth. Since her second divorce, she hardly dates. I mean, sure, this town is big, but it's not that big. Ben lets us know almost every time she goes out. We're not being nosy, but we usually babysit when she does. So we have a pretty good idea. We still hang out in the same places. We know she has dated some guys, but she hasn't been with anyone lately. It seems like she might be scared or something. And I wish I could say her feelings for me still lingered. But that's not true. That thought ended as soon as Marissa and I got married. At first, we thought she didn't want to be seen as someone who gets around. Now," he shrugged. "Her reasoning makes a lot of sense." He patted me on the shoulder, which made me think she isn't the selfish person she used to be. Maybe she has finally figured out what really matters, and it's not just herself anymore. I couldn't look at him when I asked the next question, worried about the answer. "If she's seeing someone else, I doubt she's told me much about her and Allison taking you out to get the dog." He said that was the first time she had even mentioned another guy, or seemed happy to meet one in a long time, maybe almost a year. He pays attention to those things. He's pretty protective. I guess he wonders why she isn't with someone again, just like I do. I nodded, thinking about what he said. "Still," he continued, "you got to wonder." "About what?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "She's known you for what, a few weeks now?" I nodded. "And you both left together last night?" I confirmed. "Right." "And you spent the night together?" he questioned. I shook my head sadly. "Just 2 kisses. Good kisses. Great kisses, actually, but still just 2 kisses. A beer here, 2 beers at the bar and grill, and then home by 10. He pretended to be amazed at just that. I laughed. "Tell me about it." He was still chuckling when he left a little while later. Having Kyle back after just 3 days apart reminded me how much busier I was at home when he wasn't there, and it also reminded me how much happier and less lonely I felt. We had fun spending the afternoon making toy tanks and soldiers in the basement, painting the cool tin figures. It's clear why the bond between a father and son is so special. When I arrived at my office just before 8 on Tuesday morning, I said to Heather and Randy, "What do you have for me?" Randy looked at Heather, who nodded. She reached into her backpack and handed me a neatly typed note. "And yours?" I asked Randy. He avoided eye contact, but Heather answered for him. "We worked on it together. I ran into him Sunday night and we spent a lot of time discussing our notes. Our ideas were pretty much the same, so we combined them into one neat package for you." I looked between them and then down at the note. "Is that true, Randy?" I asked. "Yes," he stammered. "So this one note contains all of your ideas, the ones you each had separately?" I pressed. "Yes," he replied quietly. I looked at Heather. "Why did you choose to do it this way?" She shrugged, not bothered by my calm attitude. "Why read the same thing twice? Time is money, you know. This way, you'll get all the ideas and only have to read them once," Randy added. "We also worked together to make the ideas more detailed." I studied both of them for a moment. In the past, I had interns who acted like this, but it was usually because one of them did all the work. Or they would swap off tasks, doing only half the amount of work while still getting paid. That didn't seem to be the case with these two. "Okay," I said, setting the memo aside. "What do you think is the best idea for a new way to look at this time in Roman history?" "We can do even better than that," Heather said, practically bouncing in her chair. "We even came up with a title. And it's enough for a book, too." I raised my eyebrows. "Don't keep me guessing. What is it?" "Was the empire inevitable?" she replied, raising her hand for me to give Randy a turn to speak. He cleared his throat. "The question is, did the Roman Republic have to end? How many moments could have changed its path? Small and big events that could have stopped the short rule that Julius Caesar started when Octavian took over. And why did it go on even after Octavian? After Caesar Augustus died?" I thought for a moment. It wasn't a completely new idea, but there seemed to be lots of angles to explore. "That's it?" I asked. "No," Heather said quickly. Before I could stop her, we compare it to a modern shift from a republic to a dictatorship to show how history repeats itself. "Okay, Heather, I'm interested. Which modern shift do we use?" "America," she declared proudly. "Us, the United States." I frowned, unsure. Her head nodded so enthusiastically I thought she might lose a tooth. "Sure. We're not there yet, but look at the similarities. Wealth divides. The military, big businesses, the same old men and some women running things for years from Washington. And all their campaigns are paid for by the extremely wealthy and businesses," Randy added. "Those rich people can keep their power and use the rest of us to help them do it." "That sounds a lot like a conspiracy theory," I said, intrigued but still curious about what more they had. "It's not," Randy replied. "Think about it. The government waves the flag to keep everyone loyal and proud to be American. The Romans did the same thing," Heather chimed in. "Every time there was a threat to the empire or when people wanted a return to the republic, the emperors did the same." "Wow!" Professor Heather exclaimed. "This is how Caesar took complete control from the start. He played the rich against the poor, promised both groups things he never really delivered, and kept them focused on wars and pride in each other. And Octavian was even worse. Randy said he almost made Caesar seem like a saint to the people. This helped him carry out the civil war and stay in power while getting rid of his political rivals." I leaned back and looked at both of them. I was impressed by their ideas. The story of Caesar wasn't in the book. I noticed that. "I know," Heather said. "But when I got interested, I read up on it." "And you?" I asked Randy. "He already knew all that," Heather answered for him. "My quick research was just reading a paper he wrote for Professor Whitman's class last year." I nodded and relaxed in my chair, looking between them. But the more I thought about their topic, the wider my smile grew after a minute of silence. They started to smile too. "It's good, isn't it?" Heather asked. I responded, "Maybe really good. There has been a lot written about the change from republic to empire, but not much looks at it from the other side." It didn't consider what little changes could have stopped the slide to tyranny. She glanced at Randy, who blushed a bit but kept smiling. I think he was happier about Heather's approval than about mine. "All right," I said, leaning forward in my chair. "Here's what will happen. You two will spend the next week researching many sources about the conditions in Rome from about 110 BC to 47 BC. That's when land reforms were starting. Look into wealth differences, wars, senators, and how power was often passed down in families. And you will do this work separately. Got it?" "Understood," they both said. "Then come together and give me a simple outline with your sources. Nothing fancy, just the basics." They nodded. "Next week, I want the same thing for the United States from after World War II to the start of Bill Clinton's presidency. Include as many long-term senators and Congress members, high-level officials, and their family members in important positions as you can. Sound good as long as it's just the basics?" Heather said. "Yeah," Randy added. "We can't go too deep too quickly. Just the basics for now." I agreed, giving them both a serious look. "But there's one more thing you need to include." "What?" Randy asked. "You have your main idea." "Okay," I said. "I'm saying in an article, or more likely, a book, that the Roman Republic fell into dictatorship because of certain reasons. Changing any of those small things might have made a difference, and that those same reasons are happening in America now. Right?" They nodded. "Well, don't be completely sure of your idea, okay? Just because we think something is true, that doesn't mean we should ignore all the evidence that says otherwise. If there are any differences, I want to see them. I want them made very clear. Even if the sources say different things, I want to hear about it. Do you understand what I mean? This might change our idea, but it doesn't mean we should throw everything away. Right?" "Exactly," I agreed. "But if you want the whole thing to be a mess, then just ignore anything that disagrees with you and push on with your own facts. That makes me look like a fool. Picking and choosing facts is something liars do," Randy said, repeating one of the lessons I always talked about in class. "But historians don't do that." Heather finished for him. I said, "You two really paid attention in class?" They laughed. Their happiness over my support for their idea and new project showed on their faces. After a tough summer of being alone and feeling miserable, the first day of classes felt like putting on old, comfy shoes. It felt good and familiar. I was happy to be back, surrounded by young men and women who were just as excited to learn as I was to teach them. It was nice, almost as nice as going home to Kyle and Sunny. My daily life there was becoming easy. Of course, there were still tough moments of sadness and memories, but I was learning to handle both the present and the past a little better each day. Little did I know. "Look, Dad," Kyle said at breakfast, pointing to a picture on the front page of the Lincoln County Register. "Your mom is on the front page." "Why?" "She started a big trial yesterday." "What kind of trial?" "Some men are accused of selling illegal drugs to children." I nodded. Kyle cared a lot about kids, and it broke my heart to think about what he was going through. Sometimes it's tough for adults too, especially if their moms are trying to get them in trouble. "That's right," I said. Kyle smiled for the first time when talking about his mom. "That's true," I said. Then I remembered something. "She might be home late tonight, honey." "Why?" "Because of the trial. Sometimes they go on longer than expected." He thought for a second, then nodded. "That's okay, I guess this is pretty important, right? But not more important than you. I know, but it can't be avoided, I guess." "Exactly. But that doesn't mean she loves you any less." "I know, Dad." He turned back to the comics, showing he was bored with our talk. But when Whitney hadn't called by 6:30, I was starting to feel angry. Years of experience told me that trials, even important ones, usually end by 5 p.m. She had plenty of time to get home, change, and pick up Kyle. Surely she could at least call. I started calling her cell and office phones at 10 minutes to 7, but all I got were frustrating messages. By 9 o'clock, I was too mad to leave another message. Kyle had been in bed for half an hour, feeling sad. I really wanted her to answer so I could tell her how I felt. But when 9:30 came and she still hadn't answered, I gave up. What did I expect? She seemed to choose her work over Kyle just like she always put it ahead of me during our marriage. This was affecting her own child. I couldn't believe it. My class, 20th century foreign policy decision-making ended at 2:20. I was putting away my things when I heard someone clear their throat. I looked up and saw a man and a woman, both looking pretty tired. They were dressed in nice clothes, and I noticed something unusual. The man said, "Professor Patterson." I replied, "What can I do for you, detective?" I closed my briefcase and rested against the lectern. The man gave the woman a look, then turned back to me. I said, "It's the shoulder holsters. You need haircuts. Dressed in jackets, you're either detectives or spies trying to kidnap me. I don't think anyone, foreign or otherwise, cares about me, so you must be detectives, right?" The man said, "Lieutenant," and nodded toward the woman, who he called Sergeant Adams. "Can I help you, Lieutenant?" He asked if I had a few minutes. I checked my watch and said I could give them 15 minutes before I needed to head home to meet my son after school. The lieutenant looked at the sergeant, and she just shrugged. Something passed between their looks. Then he started asking questions. "Were you married to Whitney Patterson?" "Yes." The prosecutor. "That's right. And you're divorced now, correct?" "Yes." "When was the last time you talked to her?" "Sunday morning around 11. "What did you talk about?" "She wanted to drop Kyle off a day early for her weekend visit." "Did that make you mad?" "A little, but it worked out in the end." "Why were you angry?" "That's not your concern," I replied. The sergeant, with a sad smile, took over the questions. "Did she say why she was dropping him off early?" "Yes. She waited for me to keep talking, but I was already a bit annoyed by their attitudes and how they were questioning me, so forget it." I answered their question. They could ask the next one. "Okay, Professor," she said, sounding impatient. "Why did she drop him off early?" She said she was dropping him off early. I emphasized, not really sure if she was being honest because Kyle had nothing to do at her apartment. He was bored. He missed his puppy, and she wanted to start getting ready for her big trial that was coming up in a couple of days. "But you don't believe her?" she asked, noticing my hesitation. I shrugged. I hadn't really thought about it. If that's what she said, then that's what she said. "So you don't trust her?" the lieutenant pressed. "She's my ex-wife, Lieutenant. It's only been about a month since the divorce, so excuse me if I don't trust her." "Right, so you're not in a good place right now," he said. "Was it a tough divorce?" "Yep," Sergeant Adams added, writing in her notebook. I stayed silent as the lieutenant took over again. "What did you say when she told you she was bringing him home?" I told her to go ahead. Any plans I had would have to change. "Were you angry?" "No." "Not even a little?" "No." "Is this how you want me to ask the question, Lieutenant?" I asked, my voice sounding frustrated. "How did her asking to bring him home early make you feel?" He frowned at my tone, and I frowned back. The answer to that question is frustrating. It was frustrating. We had already changed the weekend schedule to give her time to prepare. Then she missed her first Wednesday night visit for the same reason. Now she was cutting short her first visit for work. I felt frustrated and sad, too, for Kyle. He shouldn't have to feel less important in his mother's life. I looked at Sergeant Adams, whose expression softened, but she looked away. "Write it down, Sergeant. Frustrated. Don't forget that one." She nodded and wrote it down. "Let's make this quick," I said. She dropped him off at the curb, didn't even bring him to the door or help him with his bag. That's the last I heard from her. "What about last night?" Sergeant Adams asked. "It was a Wednesday. Did she show up?" I shook my head. "Nope, didn't even call, just ignored him. And yes, that really bothered me." "What did you do about it?" asked the lieutenant. I replied, "I left about 7 messages on her cell and at her office's voicemail." "When did you do that?" "Between 7 and around 9:30. The mood of your messages went from upset to extremely upset. You should have seen Kyle's face as the night went on. She didn't even try to call. I was filled with anger just thinking about how disappointed my little boy was. But her next words popped my anger like a balloon. "She's missing," he said. "She didn't show up for work this morning. Nobody has seen her since she left the courthouse a little after 5 last night." I felt my eyes widen as I looked between the two of them. "So, you were home last night between around 4:30 and 8 o'clock? Adams asked. I nodded. "Did anyone else see you besides your son?" I nodded again. "My neighbors, the Messias family. They saw me at about 5. We talked for a few minutes while the kids played. Then again at around 6:30 and a few times after that when I went out on the back deck to call Whitney. They were outside in their yard all night." "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky and dry. We were having a barbecue. Sally and Charlie just sat on the deck, talking and watching their kids run around until about 7:30. They weren't out there after that. I saw a movement at the door and looked over. It was Professor Whitman. I said to the lively history dean, "Look, I glanced at the two detectives. "We're done here," she said. Sergeant Adams closed her notebook while Javers dug into his jacket pocket. "Here," he said, handing me a wrinkled business card. "If you think of anything, call us, okay?" I nodded and put the card in my pocket as I watched them leave. They both nodded to Professor Whitman as they walked by. "Luke, is now a bad time?" I stared at him, unsure of how to tell Kyle. "What is it?" he asked. "It's Whitney," I said. "She's disappeared." His eyes widened. "My God." "Sorry," I replied, grabbing my briefcase. "I need to get home before Kyle gets there." I walked past him without another word. I checked the call history on my home phone and saw a number I didn't recognize from Sunday. I wrote it down on a piece of paper as I dialed. "Hello?" she said. Thank goodness. I managed to get it on the first try. "Kristen," I said, my eyes on Kyle in the backyard. "Look, something is wrong. Can you come over here?" "Luke, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" "It's Whitney. She's disappeared." "Did she run away or was she taken?" "I think it's the second one," I said. "The police interviewed me an hour and a half ago. She didn't show up for work this morning and nobody has seen her since last night." "Maybe she just needed a break," Kristen suggested. "Not a chance. She's in the middle of a big trial. If she just left, she'd be fired and would never work again. She might even lose her license." Kristen didn't hesitate. "We'll be right over." 10 minutes later, Ben ran through the house and out the sliding glass door to the backyard. Kristen quickly followed. She looked nervous as she checked on me. "Are you okay?" she asked. "What should I tell him?" I replied. "Nothing. Not a single word." "But what if—" she started, determination on her face. "If it's really bad news, you tell him when you know for sure. Otherwise, just say she's busy and we'll spend time with him after the trial is over. Just lie to him." "Yes, Luke." She took a deep breath. "You can't tell him she's missing. Do you want to tell him the truth? That she might be hurt or in danger?" I shivered. Those thoughts had raced through my mind, but she was the first to say them out loud. Ex-wife or not, Whitney was still Kyle's mother. I also realized again that I still had some feelings for the woman who had pushed me away. "Listen," Kristen said in a calm voice. "If Kyle thinks she's ignoring him, he will feel hurt, angry, and upset. But sadly, there are other kids in his class. In fact, one is in the backyard with him right now. They have all been through hard times too. Kyle has been dealing with this for the last 6 months, and this will feel like just another tough moment. But if you tell him she might be gone or hurt, Jesus, Luke, he'll be really upset. He'll have nightmares. It won't be good. So don't tell him unless you have to." She was right. Morality isn't easy. Nothing is just black or white. The world has many shades of gray. If there was ever a time to keep the truth from my child, this was definitely one of those times. "What should I do?" I asked. "You let the police do their job," she said, seeing my worried expression. "I know it's hard. You'll feel helpless, but there's nothing else you can do. You're a history professor, not a police officer. But there must be something I can do." She hugged me tightly. I buried my face in her shoulder and caught a scent of her shampoo. "Peaches, just like Whitney's sometimes. Stay strong, Luke," she whispered. "That's what you can do. Be strong for Kyle. Just be there for him," she continued. "That's the most important thing right now. Understand?" I squeezed her tighter, feeling comforted by her closeness. "Now let's make some dinner," she said, loosening her grip. "We'll stay for a bit so Kyle can play with Ben." "Thanks," was all I could think to say. "What are friends for?" she replied, then started looking through the refrigerator for something to cook. I tossed and turned in bed all night. The dreams came back, along with the pain in my hip. I felt like I was being shot at from all sides. Iraqi soldiers were taking over the trenches, and new trenches kept appearing all around me. Looking around, I saw my platoon members either dying or already dead. I kept shooting, even as the bullets hit me. I woke up suddenly, gasping for breath. The last image from my dream stuck in my mind, Whitney being pulled away by a group of Iraqi soldiers. They were trying to take her from me while I struggled to shoot at them with a big machine gun, but I kept missing. I automatically turned to look outside at the bad weather I knew was coming. It was starting to drizzle, just a light mist. The sky was dark gray with angry thunderclouds moving across it. It felt like another damp morning, just like so many others since that day in southern Iraq. My hip and thigh ached deeply, like the bullets and shrapnel were still inside me. The only difference today was that Whitney had disappeared without a trace. My boy's mother was gone. I felt a strong urge to get up and look for her. The thought of taking action kept nagging at me. Then I remembered Kristen's words and realized she was right. I didn't know anything about finding someone who had been kidnapped, but there was still something bothering me, something I couldn't quite grasp. As I thought more, my mind struggled to focus. After 2 hours, Kyle pointed something out. That's when it all hit me. The answers to my many questions and the bigger picture suddenly became clear. The realization felt like a freight train crashing into me. I felt compelled to ignore Kristen's advice and instead decided to take charge. Whitney's disappearance and the delay in the crazy drug trafficking trial had become front-page news. I read the article twice, looking at photos of Whitney and of the lab's defense attorney, Dunlop. He looked like the standard narcotics lawyer you see on TV, an expensive blue suit, a white shirt with fancy cuffs, and shiny cufflinks. He had a square jaw, a wide smile with perfect teeth, and his hair looked like it was held in place with a lot of hairspray. He seemed slick and untrustworthy. Just like when I woke up, something in the article started stirring the thoughts in my mind again. Whitney had gone missing, and Lottie and Dunlop were urging for the trial to start again, or for it to be canceled. Dunlop claimed that canceling it would wipe out all charges against his client. I held up the newspaper for Kyle to see, exposing the shocking news. "Why is Mommy in the paper?" he asked. "And Charlie?" I squinted at him. "Charlie?" He pointed at the pictures. "Yeah, Charlie. He's a lawyer like Mommy. He came over on Sunday morning while I was eating." I turned the paper back to the front. Lawton Dunlop. I pointed to the picture. "This is the man she called Charlie." "Yeah," he replied, then went back to his comics, forgetting his questions. I sat there stunned. Charlie Charles Lawton Dunlop. This was his email address, not the one for her law firm. Whitney had been involved with her lawyer while the case was still happening. Now it was a serious trial, and Whitney was nowhere to be found. It didn't take much to realize why Whitney had disappeared. I got up from the table to find him and share what I had learned. I took his business card, ready to call him, and stepped outside so Kyle wouldn't hear. Just as I was about to dial, more thoughts flooded my mind. When did Dunlop start pursuing Whitney? I guessed it was when she was assigned to the case. Rosie was a prosecutor. Why did he go after her? Perhaps to get details about the prosecution's plans, or to try and get her replaced with someone less competent to assist him in sabotaging the trial. If that was true, why would Whitney let it happen? It would have caused a big scandal that could have ruined her career. I needed to look into this more. "What are you doing, Dad?" Kyle asked as he cleaned up his bowl and glass. "I'll only be a few minutes," I replied, rushing to the den to search online. A quick look at the archives gave me the information I needed in under 10 minutes. When the case started, an attorney named Leland Smithers was handling it. Smithers had been involved until 3 months ago, when Dunlop's name began appearing as the defense lawyer. 3 months ago, right after our divorce was filed. I stared at the screen, anger building inside me. That underhanded man had tried to ruin my marriage for his own gain in defending a couple of low-life drug dealers. As I drove Kyle to school, I made up my mind. I was done with gamers and the police and Charles Lawton Dunlop. This felt personal, and I wanted my payback. I had 2 classes on Thursday, both in the morning, and I was done by noon. Honestly, I barely remembered those classes. I just stood there talking about whatever was in the books. The students gave short answers and practically ran out to their cars when the last class ended. I heard Doug calling my name from behind, but I didn't stop. Instead, I waved, jumped into my car, and sped away. I needed time to think, to come up with a plan, and, of course, to gather as much information as I could over the next 5 hours. I didn't want to rush into anything based on guesses and ignore any facts that did not fit my theory. There was a small chance that Charles Lawton Dunlop wasn't the man I was after. Still, that chance seemed slim. The more information I could gather, the better prepared I would be. 3 hours later, I was in my office, leaning back and deep in thought. My research uncovered some interesting details. First, Charles Lawton Dunlop had been a lawyer for 14 years and was just under 40 years old. He had always worked in criminal defense, first at the public defender's office and then on his own for the last 9 years. He had a trial record that was about 50/50ths, which sounded pretty good. Most of his cases didn't go to trial. They were often dropped for no clear reason. Moreover, reports of his trials suggested that some of the jury decisions were unexpected. So it seemed Dunlop had some questionable history, which led to obvious questions. How did Whitney not know about his past? And if she did know, why would she let him close without being more careful? This made me think that she might have been an easy target. It felt like our marriage was already over in her mind. Next, I learned about Carlo and Vincent. They owned 14 pizza places around Chicago, and news articles hinted they were somehow connected to the Chicago outfit. Carlo was around 50, short, heavy, and bald. Vincent was a few years younger, also short but lean, with thinning hair styled back and scars on his face from acne. Carlo looked like a round little pig, while Vincent had a mean look, like a ferret. Both of them seemed dangerous. There was something in their cold stares at the booking camera that sent chills down my spine. The Lab Roses were being tried in state court for selling heroin through their pizza shops. This court case was practiced for a bigger federal charge related to organized crime violations. The federal charges had just come out last month. They were based on the idea that drugs were coming into the country hidden inside pizza supplies. Many people thought that even if the state case didn't work out, the Lab Roses would still face trouble with the federal case. But if they didn't win the state case first, the federal case wouldn't matter. If they lost, they could face 50 years or more for the state charges. I was dealing with a shady mob lawyer and his 2 mob clients. I needed to find out what they had done with Whitney. If she was still alive, I had to figure out how to bring her back. I had to connect Dunlop to her kidnapping, maybe even murder, without anyone knowing I was involved. I knew Carlo and Vincent had some part in Dunlop's plan that ruined my marriage, but I didn't want to cross paths with the mob. It would be nice to catch them both, but it wasn't my main goal. That's when I started to worry. If I got caught, Kyle's life would be at risk. I didn't want dangerous criminals after me, especially if they could hurt Kyle. I also didn't want to be hiding away for the rest of my life, moving my son from place to place. Just as I was about to give up, the doorbell rang. "Professor Patterson," Lieutenant Garver said when I opened the door. "Can we come in for a moment?" I checked my watch. It was 10 after 3. Kyle would be home any minute. "This way," I said, leading them to the back deck. "Kyle doesn't know anything yet, and I don't want him to find out until we know what's happening." Officers Adams and Garver followed me through the house to the back deck. I let my son's dog run ahead of us and then closed the door behind us. "Heard anything yet?" I asked. Garver paused and turned to Sergeant Adams. "We have a few follow-up questions," she said, flipping open her notebook. I waited, glaring at them. "Did your ex-wife wear any jewelry?" I closed my eyes, picturing her. "Yes, she had a gold locket on a gold chain. There was a picture of Kyle inside." She nodded and made a check mark in her notebook. Then she sighed and looked at Garver. He looked back at her, eyes narrowing, then turned to me. "Why did you get divorced?" he asked. "None of your business," I replied. He sighed. "I'm afraid it is my business, Professor. It's very much my business. Unless you want us to arrest you and bring you in for more questioning, you need to answer my question. Why did you get divorced? We know you filed, so why?" I looked from him to her. Adams looked embarrassed by the whole thing, but Garver's face showed nothing but patience. I looked at Adams when I replied because she said she didn't love me anymore. After all the years we spent together, she just didn't feel that way anymore. She said she was bored and stuck in a routine. I didn't lash out at her, even though I could have. I work hard, take care of the house, Kyle, and her. I felt a lump in my throat and tried to keep it down. My last words came out as a shaky whisper. I still don't understand why. Adam stared at the ground as I spoke. "Was she seeing someone else?" Garver asked as he moved closer. I didn't know. I lied. Then I changed my words a bit. Maybe she wouldn't want to speak about it. Just that there was someone, but it wasn't romantic. That's what she told me, at least. Do you know who this person might be? I turned to look at him. He was watching me closely, and I forced myself to keep eye contact as I replied. Not a clue. Slowly, his right eyebrow raised a bit. Any guesses? I shook my head. It could have been anyone. Someone from work. She worked long hours. She would often come home around 7:30 or 8. She had plenty of time. Garver just stared at me. He knew I was hiding something. No matter how much I tried to hide it, my lips curled into a small smirk. The smirk that said, "Yes, I know you can see I'm not telling the whole truth. You know," he said after a moment, "this changes how people see you." How so? She was being unfaithful. You're divorced now, but you're still angry. Angry enough to maybe want to harm her. Really? I replied. Really? He said again. Good luck proving that, I said, unable to stop myself from sneering. I have a strong alibi for the whole night, and you know it. I saw the officers talking to Sally Romesco next door when I got back home. Or didn't you ask them yet? Maybe you got someone else to do it for you. I laughed, a bitter laugh. Yeah, right. I did a quick search for people who take care of cheating partners, paid the fees, and then they showed up. Wouldn't be the first time, Adam said, feeling stronger with his pressing questions. I know, I replied, a family member or ex-husband. The first one makes sense, but you already looked into that and you know it's not true, right? Garver said, trying another approach. If you're hiding something, you could be charged as an accomplice. Nice try, Lieutenant, but no way. And you can forget about the obstruction of justice threat you'll throw at me next. Good luck with both, then. He just stared at me, his jaw tightening with anger. So if we're done here, I said, seeing the front door open, I think my son is home. They both glared at me, but then Sergeant Adams saw it wouldn't help to keep questioning me as I walked past them and back into the house. Hey, little man, I said, picking him up as they walked past me and left through the front door. We spent the next hour finishing Kyle's homework. Then Kyle headed outside to play with the Romesco kids and their dog, Sonny. I spent this time thinking hard about everything. First thought, if I told the police what I knew, they would only ask Dunlop some questions. He wouldn't talk. He was a lawyer, after all. If he didn't talk, he might try to hurt Whitney and hide her away where nobody would find her. The rules seemed to protect the bad guys, but I wasn't bound by those same rules. Second, yes, Whitney had cheated on me, and that was a big part of the divorce. But that didn't mean I wanted anything bad to happen to her. If she was still alive, I needed to save her. I also needed to make sure I stayed safe. I wanted to live, but my biggest fear was leaving Kyle without a mom or dad. Third, if I could find Whitney and she was alive, I had to do it all without anyone knowing. The gangsters scared me more than the police, but both were scary. Getting killed was terrible, but going to prison for a long time would be almost as bad. Fourth, I had to handle everything by myself. Plans work best when there aren't too many people involved. The more people who knew anything, the more chance I'd get caught. That's when I went to the basement and opened my safe for weapons. A plan started to take shape in my mind. I took out the Colt AR-15 I had kept for years and laid it on the table. I carefully took it apart and cleaned it well. I spent the next 15 minutes making sure it was in top shape. Then I loaded 320 rounds of ammo into clips and stacked them next to the rifle. Next, I took out my Glock 9mm and cleaned it the same way, loading clips afterward. I finished all of this in about 30 minutes. I packed everything into a duffel bag along with a black ski mask, black sweatpants, black shoes, socks, and a sweatshirt. I thought about using black shoe polish on my hands to hide them, but that felt risky. If I got caught, it would be hard to explain and hard to wash off. By the time I finished, the plan was almost ready. That's when I remembered something I had been putting off. I decided to check it, hoping it might give me something useful. Surprisingly, it gave me a lot of information, confirming what I feared. I logged in and opened the last email. It read, Luke, I'm so sorry, dear Luke. By now you know everything. You know I lied. You know I cheated. You may have even found out who he is. His name is Charles Dunlop. He's a lawyer and a good one. I don't know how it all started. I remember feeling upset with you. With me? Really? But she blamed me. I felt sad. I feel bad because you do so much for us. You take care of the cooking and cleaning, and I know I should be helping you more with that. On the other hand, I was really close to getting a big job at work. I was about to become the chief of the criminal division. After 10 years of working hard, I was almost there, but I felt bad that I was achieving this success at the cost of my family. How did this become your fault? I see now that I blamed you for doing all the things I left behind to chase my career. It doesn't make sense, I know. But back then, I thought if you had complained more about carrying all the weight, I would have had to cut back on work and help more at home. That's pretty messed up, right? Even writing this, it still doesn't make sense to me. I was blaming you for helping me reach my goals when I wasn't giving you anything back. I don't know how Charlie noticed this, but he did. He saw I was unhappy and he tried to make me feel better. And I let him. I wish I could blame you for this, but I can't. It wasn't your fault. You were always there for Kyle and me, giving your all without complaining. I see now how wrong I was. I remember that Saturday when I left you with Kyle to meet Charlie. That's why I ended things with him that day. I wanted to come home and ask for your forgiveness, but you didn't give it. I don't blame you. If the tables were turned, I wouldn't have forgiven you either. But I do know a few things. My biggest mistake wasn't the time I spent with Charlie. Yes, that was likely unforgivable. It wasn't even refusing to tell you the truth, which was also wrong. No, my biggest mistake was saying I didn't love you anymore and that I didn't want to be married. The first two mistakes might have been serious, but the third one really destroyed our marriage. I want you to know that I will never forgive myself for what I did. For being unfaithful, for not being honest, and worst of all, for letting you think this was your fault. It was my fault alone. After you filed for divorce, I wanted to tell you all of this, but I saw how much pain I had caused you. Every time I looked at your pain, I knew I didn't deserve you back. You deserve someone who would never hurt you like this. To this day, I can hardly look at you without feeling overwhelming shame. In closing, Luke, I know that my actions have hurt my marriage, my husband, my son, and our family. I wish I could take it back. Every night I sit alone in my apartment, thinking about the past and wondering what I was thinking. I want you to know that I have one last important job to handle. I believe I can win it, and if I do, I will finally get the job I have always wanted. The chief of the criminal division. When they offer me that job, I will resign. I will focus on being a mother to our little boy. I hope you will let me do this. It's the only hope I have left. I want to help you rebuild your life after my mistakes, with deep regret and lasting love, Whitney. I'll admit it. My eyes were wet when I finished reading Whitney's letter. My mind was filled with questions. What if she had told me the truth that day? Would I have taken her back? What if I had noticed when she started pulling away months before? Could I have stopped it all? Now that my worries were confirmed, I only wondered if Whitney had figured out Dunlop's cruel plans before she left. If she did, how did she feel knowing she was risking her marriage for a man who didn't care about her or her issues, just wanted to win in a case? My sadness turned to anger as I deleted the message, erasing all traces from my computer. I tried to hide my feelings when Kristen and Ben arrived, but Kristen could see something was wrong. She looked at me and told Ben to go outside to play, keeping her eyes on me. "You know where she is, don't you?" she asked when Ben was outside. I stayed quiet. "What will you do?" she pressed. "I need you to watch Kyle, tonight," I finally said. "Luke, you have to call the police. You can't face this alone. You might get hurt. Then who will take care of Kyle?" I shook my head. "I can't say much, Kristen." "That's not right," she said, looking outside to make sure the boys were safe before turning back to me. "You are going to run out there like some cowboy and you might get hurt. You don't even consider what will happen to Kyle if that happens." "What? That's not fair," I shot back. "You think I haven't thought about that? But if I call the cops, it might be too late. She could be hurt so they don't get caught. And then what do I tell Kyle?" "But Luke," she said, her eyes asking me to think again. "There has to be another way." I shook my head. "I've been thinking about this all day ever since I figured it out this morning. There's no other way. Trust me. I don't want to do this." She didn't say a word, but her eyes were begging me not to go, even as my words sank in. "Just believe me," I told her. All I could think about was Kyle. The truth is, I can't stand the idea of seeing him at his mother's funeral if Whitney is gone. I always thought that maybe I could have stopped it. If she dies, I need to at least catch the one responsible for this. She was trembling. The fear and weight of the situation showed on her face and in her body. "Promise me you won't get hurt," she said. "Please, Luke, you have to be careful." I tried to give her a comforting smile. "Just watch the boys tonight and I'll be back by midnight or so, okay?" Tears ran down her cheeks and I wiped them away gently. "Pull yourself together," I said. "Just keep an eye on the boys. Everything will turn out fine." She nodded. "Okay." I left around 8, just as the sun was going down. I knew I had to do this at night. I had no idea how many people I would face, where I was going, or what would happen when I got there. The dark and surprise would be my only friends. As I drove out of the driveway, I noticed a car parked down the street. It slowly began to move with its headlights off. Someone was following me. I drove carefully, making sure not to attract attention and reveal the items I was carrying. If I got caught, Whitney would be in serious trouble. 20 minutes later, I drove past Charles Dunlop's law office. There were no lights on and no cars in the lot. I hoped he was home and that his address was correct. My plan was risky, but it was the only way to draw him out and find Whitney. Or at least find the people who hurt her. I realized I was still being followed and identified the driver when I went through a well-lit intersection. It was Sergeant Adams. I was right. They knew I was hiding something and suspected I wanted to do something about it. Great. Now I had to avoid them while trying to save Whitney. I started thinking through different plans, all depending on whether the detective had backup. It had always been like this during my time in the military. I would make a good plan, start it, and then something would go wrong. Throughout history, the great leaders managed to adapt and handle the changes. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of those great leaders. I was an infantry leader trained at West Point, but my first mission had knocked me out for good. I hadn't thought like a soldier in nearly 20 years, and none of it was coming back as quickly as I hoped. I pushed those worries aside as I pulled up in front of Dunlop's house. The living room was bright, and I noticed a shape moving through the thin curtains inside. It was time to act. I thought about my plan again. If I went through with it and failed, Whitney's life would be in danger. They wouldn't keep her alive if they thought the police were onto them. I believed they might harm Whitney anyway, if they hadn't already. I took out my disposable phone and dialed the number I had saved. Dunlop picked up on the second ring. "Hello?" he asked. I wanted this to be quick and to the point. "This is going to be short," I said. "Who is this?" he replied. "Stay quiet. I'm a friend. That's all you need to know for now." He hesitated and then asked, "What do you want?" "They're listening to you," I said. "On your office phone, your cell, even at home." He went silent. I continued. "The wiretap warrants were signed today and your name is on one of them. You can guess who else is involved. You'll want to know me later, and when you do, I expect you to show your thanks." "And how can I trust you?" he asked. "You can't afford not to," I fired back. "This conversation ends here. I won't say more if they are already listening." With that, I hung up the phone, drove to the end of the cul-de-sac, and waited to see if Dunlop would react. I didn't know where Sergeant Adams had parked, but I figured she was outside the cul-de-sac, watching us leave. 10 minutes later, Dunlop came out of his house, looked around, then got into his Cadillac and drove off. I felt pleased with myself. I started my car and followed him, staying far behind so I wouldn't be noticed. Sergeant Adams was right behind me. Soon we were speeding down country roads close to 70 miles per hour. I panicked as I threw the disposable phone out the window and into a creek. If I tried to catch up with Dunlop, Adams might pull me over, and Whitney might never be seen again. If I didn't keep up, I could lose him, and Whitney could be hurt. I decided to stay on Dunlop's tail. I hoped that Adams and her partner would trust me to follow him, thinking I knew what I was doing. They had to know I was on his trail. I stepped on the gas to catch up with the disappearing brake lights ahead. After 2 miles, Adams hadn't stopped me. She was staying about a quarter mile behind. I smiled, knowing we might lose each other on these long, quiet roads. Just as I was feeling proud of my calm, the red lights of the Cadillac turned and vanished from view. I slowed down to 50 miles per hour, not wanting to crawl by too slowly if he was waiting at a turn ahead. Even at that speed, I almost missed the dirt path going into the woods. A few hundred yards in, I spotted a quick flash of red lights, so I pulled my car to a stop in a ditch well off the road. Adams had slowed down behind me. I lowered my mask, snatched my duffel bag, and slipped out of the car and into the woods before Adam noticed where I went. I watched from the edge of the trees as Adam slowed to a full stop next to my car. She shone a light into my car, made a short call on her phone, then parked in front of my vehicle. I was deep into the woods, walking along the overgrown path, when I heard her car door slam behind me. It was a dark night with no moon, and the ground was still wet from the morning rain. I was soaked from the waist down within 50 yards, but the excitement pumped through my body. It felt just like when I was in the army. Times of planning followed by moments of calm and then more tension. This was even more intense. Once the plan began, it reminded me of a morning long ago, the morning I crossed into Iraq, knowing they would fire back, that people could die. It was a mix of nerves and chilling fear, so much that even the tiniest sound made me jump and scan the dark. Now, it was worse. I was out of shape and lost the confidence of my younger days. After walking 300 yards, the trail turned left and opened into a clearing. I stopped there and looked at the open space ahead. Down a slight slope about 75 yards away was an old, rusty shed. The red Cadillac was parked next to an old Ford pickup truck. I took in the area, thinking about how to use it to my advantage. The shed was at the bottom of a small dip in the ground. This worked in my favor. I had the higher ground while they would be exposed and unable to get past me easily. The vehicles were not blocking the shed's door, but they were close enough for them to run for safety if they needed to. I couldn't shoot if Whitney was with them. There was too much risk of hitting her, so I needed to make sure the vehicles couldn't be used. To the left of the shed was a propane tank about 60 feet away. I had to stay away from that at all costs. There was no way a stray shot could hit the tank on the right side of the shed and put us in danger. I noticed soft light coming from the windows. The only thing around was bare grass leading up to the edge of the forest. I pictured the angles in my mind and decided what to do. If I positioned myself at the edge of the woods on my right, I would have a clear view inside the shed and could easily see anyone coming out toward the vehicles. The only risk was that a missed shot could hit the propane tank, but I wasn't worried about that. From 75 yards away and lying down on a hill with my AR-15, I was confident I wouldn't miss the target, even if I was a bit out of practice. I formed my plan and quietly moved along the edge of the woods, crouching low. I circled around, staying alert for any sounds or movements. When I reached the spot across from where I started, I took a deep breath, counted to 10 in my head, and hurried down the slope toward the shed. I heard a voice from inside say something about taking care of Herman. The voice sounded whiny and slurred, which made me think the windows were open. There was a strange smell coming from inside the shed, something metallic and medicinal. A second voice yelled, telling the first one not to worry. "They're coming to handle it," the voice said. "We just have to wait here." The first voice complained about the risk of getting caught. The second voice reminded the first that while murder was serious, being caught for kidnapping wasn't much better. A moment of silence followed. "You hear that?" the second voice said. "There's nothing out there." He sounded nervous. Suddenly I heard footsteps and a muffled voice. A woman's voice. It was Whitney. I knew she was still alive. They were waiting for someone to come so they could hurt her. The second voice suggested taking off her blindfold since she wouldn't be able to recognize anyone afterward. The first voice whined about that idea. I heard enough and headed back to the edge of the woods, moving along the line of trees. I scanned the ground, looking for clear shots to my right. When I reached a spot with a good view of the doorway, I stopped to set my things down. I pulled out my Glock and tucked it into the waistband at the small of my back. Then I laid flat on the damp grass, holding my rifle close to my chest. I leaned against the barrel and switched my gun to semi-automatic. This is where I would have taken my stand. 2 people were behind me. I froze and felt stuck. I heard a gun click behind me. "Drop the rifle now." My whole body relaxed as I switched my rifle to safe. When we came out from the trees, he said in a calm voice, "You were already moving around." "Not bad," he continued, "but you should have stayed lower and watched something other than the shed." I could hear the rustling in the bushes and felt his footsteps close by. I looked at everything and understood what I had to do. He went on, "You keep them pinned down." "She's alive," I said. "She's in there and she's alive," I added, pointing to my left. I heard someone take a sharp breath while she was quiet for a moment. "Did you hear her?" Adam asked. "Yes, I did. It's her." I knew it was a woman. Her mouth must have been taped. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear them. "How many are there?" Adam asked. "2 for sure." "I don't think there's anyone else, but definitely 2. One is Dunlop, the other is high on something." "Meth," Adam said. "You can smell it. This place is a meth lab." "Any more surprises before we take you over to that tree?" I asked. "There are more coming," I said. "They're waiting for someone else to show up. That person is going to hurt her and get rid of her." I heard Adam grunt, but he was cut off when headlights broke through the trees and slowly glided down toward the shed. "You don't have any rifles?" I asked, as I switched my gun back to semi-automatic. "Don't do it," Adam warned. "You need me," I said firmly. "It's just the 2 of you and now you're outnumbered. They'll hurt her. You know they will. Without me, you can't do anything to stop it." I heard feet move quickly and not quietly. "Keep them pinned down," he whispered before stepping away from the trees. "Don't let anyone out of that car," he added. Adam started to protest, but then decided against it. Instead, he crouched down next to me. "You could have told us," he said, but I replied, "I couldn't have done anything different." My eyes stayed focused on the car coming closer to the shed. I glanced to my right and saw a guy still exposed, less than 20 feet away. Back to the car, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The car jolted with the sound of my shot, and I quickly turned my aim left. It took 2 shots to hit the left tire, but the car was now just 20 feet from the others. "What the hell?" someone yelled from below as I watched the front door swing open. A tall, thin figure stepped into the light from the door, and I took a shot at the door frame above him. "Don't hurt him," Adams warned as the figure fell to the ground, looked around in fear, and quickly scrambled back inside. "Be quiet," I said, turning back to the car and shooting 2 bullets into the front. Steam began to rise from under the hood right away. They were really in trouble now, and I knew it. "He's there," Adams whispered. Her voice lost all excitement and became flat. I looked toward the shed and saw him pressed against it, holding his gun up high. I moved back to the vehicles in front of the shed and quietly shot 4 times at the front tires of the Cadillac and the pickup truck. I shot twice into the front of the Cadillac, and it started steaming too. I noticed the passenger door open on the new car, which I knew had at least one, maybe both, of the lab workers inside. I quickly shot at the door, and it shut with a loud bang. "He's pointing," she said. I turned back, grabbing a fresh clip at the same time, and saw a guy making a shooting sign toward the end of the shed closest to the vehicles. I quickly loaded the clip, aimed high on the far side of the shed, and fired 5 shots into the building. At that moment, I saw him reach his arms and gun through the open window. I caught a glimpse of one shot, and then he started crawling through the window. Just then, the front door flew open, and Dunlop ran around the vehicles and into the woods. "He's getting away," Adam said. "What about the propane tank?" But I ignored her and focused on the lab workers. They were still alive, and I was sure they had guns. "You," I said, pointing my gun down the line. "Get behind them and come in low. Stay in the trees." "But they have the guns, and Guy is alone in that shed," I replied. "If even one of them steps out of that car and into that shed, we'll have big problems." Without saying another word, she dashed off. A minute later, I saw someone climbing out through the window. She was pushed from behind and fell to the ground with a soft thud. I recognized the hair and the small figure. For a brief moment, I felt a bit of relief. Whitney was safe for now. She began to stumble up the slope toward the woods, keeping the shed between her and the lab workers. Good. I turned back to the lab workers behind their car. I saw movement on the slope and knew Adams was sneaking down behind them. To keep their attention on me, I fired 5 rounds into the front of their car without warning. An arm reached out from the passenger side and fired 5 shots toward me. I hit the dirt, trying to hide as much as I could. I heard bullets hitting the trees and ground just a few feet to my left. They finally noticed my gun flashes and figured out where I was. I knew a pistol wouldn't do much at that distance. A lucky shot could end it all for me. "Drop your guns!" Adam yelled. I looked up and saw her standing to the left of the car, arms outstretched with her pistol aimed at them. Now she yelled out the windows, "Now!" After a short pause, I saw movement and heard the sound of guns hitting the ground. Next, a guy rushed out from the building and took cover behind the right side of the vehicle. He said something I couldn't hear, then both car doors swung open. The workers poked their arms out, then lay flat on the ground next to the car. When I saw them in handcuffs, I jumped up and grabbed my bag, taking one last look at the shed nearby. I turned right and started running along the tree line. When I spotted her just inside the woods, I slowed down. Whitney was staring at the shed, shaking with fear. She looked terrified. "You'll be okay," I whispered as I got closer. She flinched and curled up, trying to make herself small. I stopped in front of her and reached out my hand. "It's me," I said through the mask. "You're going to be okay." Slowly, her hand reached for mine. When our fingers touched, she pulled away but then grabbed on tightly. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you back to them, okay?" Whitney seemed not to hear me, but she followed without a word. As we got near the shed, I stopped. "You're safe now," I said. Her grip tightened around my hand. "I need to go now," I said. "You have to let go. You're safe." Still, she would not let go. "If I'm still here when backup arrives," I said, "it won't be good for me. I could get arrested. The bad guys might come after me, or even you, Whitney. You need to let me go." That seemed to get through to her, and Whitney finally released my hand. "Remember," I said, putting my hand gently on her chin. "I was never here." She nodded slowly without saying a word. I turned and ran to my right. Once back in the trees, I made my way around and up the path toward the road. I had to leave before more police arrived. I hoped Guy and Adam wouldn't say anything. Near the road, I heard sirens in the distance. They'd be there soon. I reached into my pocket for the car keys when I suddenly heard a noise behind me. I turned around and before I knew it, I was knocked backward to the ground. "Who are you?" Dunlop shouted, trying to pull off my mask. I stayed quiet, focused on breaking free from him. He pulled his right arm back to hit me, but I pushed myself hard and rolled into him, stopping whatever punch he was about to throw. He still held on tight. I rolled onto my back and felt something sharp dig into my upper backside. I knew I had to act. Continuing my roll, I reached behind me and grabbed the Glock, holding it tight like a rock. I hit Dunlop again and again on the side of his head until he went limp. I didn't check if he was still breathing. I quickly got to my feet and jumped into my car. Within 15 seconds, I drove away from the sound of sirens, one after another, rising behind me. To my relief, I saw the police stop near Adams's car, which was parked by the side of the road. I slowed down to the speed limit, then took the next left 2 miles ahead. I headed toward my last stop of the night before going home. Now wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and dark shoes, I stood at the edge of the old gravel pit. The rush of adrenaline was fading, and I felt very tired. Still, I needed to throw everything far away. I tossed the duffel bag with my clothes and the leftover ammo into the dark water as hard as I could. I watched it float for a moment before it sank, pulled down by the weight of the 5 bricks inside. Earlier, I had thrown the rifle's broken piece into a creek on my way to the pit. The rest of the guns had been taken apart and tossed into the old monitoring wells scattered around. If anyone ever found one, they could find the others too. But I doubted anyone would look for them, and it wouldn't matter much if Cavers and Adams came for me. Even though they hadn't seen my face, Adams probably got my license plate when he followed me to the shed. Better to be cautious, though, right? The living room was dark as I walked across the floor quietly. "Are you okay?" Kristen called from the couch. I paused, feeling a wave of relief mixed with tiredness. "I'm fine," I whispered. I heard her sniffle, then a small sob escaped her lips. She hugged me tightly. Her robe and soft pajamas felt warm against me. I just wanted to hold her forever. But soon I began to feel weak, and she told me that Whitney was also fine, alive and mostly unharmed. "And the guy? What happened?" she asked, breaking our embrace. I saw her shiny eyes looking into mine. "The cops got him," I said. She hugged me again, but I felt myself start to slump toward the floor. Kristen helped me to the couch. Once I was seated, she showered me with kisses on my lips, nose, and eyes while hugging me tightly. "It's going to be okay," she kept whispering, as if trying to convince herself. I didn't say anything, worried about when Cavers and Adams would arrive to take me away. I was too tired to care, so I let Kristen talk about her feelings. "I was really scared," she said, sitting on the couch with me. "Me too," I replied, starting to fall asleep. She noticed I was tired and gently brushed my cheek with her hand. "Go to sleep," she said, and then she moved so my head could rest in her lap. My last thoughts were about how nice it felt. Kristen was running her fingers through my hair and rubbing my shoulder. It was so calming. I felt so cared for. It was like I was in a dream, but it was real. Soon I noticed my breath getting heavy, and Kristen leaned in and gave me a long kiss. "Let it go," she said softly, kissing me again. Then everything faded away. I woke up on the couch covered with a blanket and a pillow under my head. Our puppy, Sun Tzu, was curled up on my chest, snoring lightly. "Morning," Kristen said as she leaned in close. She looked bright and happy, like she had a good night's sleep. I was about to say something, but my stomach growled, waking up Sun Tzu, who looked at me with wide eyes. Kristen laughed and didn't wait for me to reply. She went into the kitchen. Sun Tzu jumped off me and followed her, his tail wagging, likely dreaming of scraps from the table. I sat up and tried to stretch out the kinks in my body. "Hey, Dad!" Kyle called from the table, his mouth full of cereal and a big smile on his face. "Morning, Mr. Patterson," Ben added. "Good morning, guys," I said, yawning. "Sit down," Kristen said as she brought me a bowl of oatmeal and a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast. "That smells great," I said, sitting in my usual chair at the table. "Eat up," she said with a smile, placing the food in front of me. She poured me a cup of coffee and set that down too. "You didn't have to do all of this," I said, beginning to eat the toast and eggs. "But I'm happy you did. Thank you." "You're welcome," Kristen replied, sitting down at the other end of the table and sipping her coffee. I finished my breakfast quickly while Ben and Kyle chatted about school, friends, and video games. Sun Tzu dashed around the table, hoping someone would drop a bite of food. Kristen watched all of this with a warm smile. It felt like a family. I realized it reminded me of the good times I had with Whitney and Kyle, just with a dog and another boy at the table. It felt nice. "So what are you going to do today?" Kristen asked, as I stood up to take my dirty dishes to the dishwasher. "I guess I'll just hang around," I said, feeling a bit uneasy. I was surprised the police hadn't come to take me away. "I'll stay home and work on some paperwork and get my notes ready for class next week." Before I could say more, Kristen added, "We want to order pizza and watch movies really late." "Sounds good," I said. I looked at him. It was just me and Ben. I turned to Kristen. "What do you think?" She shook her head. "If you have other plans or want to do something different, movies and pizza sound great to me. What about you?" Her smile was bright like a shining light. "Sounds good to me too." "Then it's decided." I gathered the boys' dishes and placed them in the dishwasher. "We should think about a sleepover." I wouldn't say the look Kristen gave me was excited, but it did remind me of a dream I had the night before. I could also tell I would soon need a break. "I'll take them to school with me," Kristen said as she put her coffee cup in the dishwasher. "You need some rest. You'll need it." She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, then playfully blew into my ear. I wanted to take a moment for myself, but the boys dashed out with their book bags and they were gone before I could react. I was dozing on the couch when the doorbell rang. I opened my eyes and saw it was just after 10. I walked to the door, feeling nervous. When I opened it, Professor Patterson stood there. Without saying anything, I stepped back and waved him and Sergeant Adams inside. "Do you have any weapons here?" I asked. Once they were inside, I nodded. "There's a gun safe in the basement." He gestured for me to lead the way. I looked at him, unsure of what he was thinking. Adams had a blank look, too. I turned and showed them to the basement, flipping on the lights when we got there. "Cool," I heard Patterson say as we moved past some battle scenes toward the far end of the long room. "Whatever," Adams said, sounding bored with my collection. I spun the combination on the gun safe, pulled it open, and stepped back. Adams leaned in, then turned and said, "They're not here." "Good," Patterson replied, crouching down to take a closer look at a diorama filled with tiny soldiers. "This must have been one tough war," he said with a smile. I nodded, wondering what they were looking for. I heard Adams whistle softly, and when I turned, she had a small wooden box open in her hands. She looked at me, then at the shiny metals inside. "I guess this explains it," she said. Patterson, who was studying some tactics, turned to her with narrowed eyes and walked over, taking the box from her. He looked inside and then at me. "Where's the citation?" he asked. I frowned, knowing that besides my fellow soldiers, Whitney was the only one who had ever seen it. His expression told me I better show him. I reached back into the safe and pulled out the folder that held the citation. Without saying a word, I handed it to him. He ran his fingers over the plastic cover, opened it, and read aloud, "Department of the Army. This is to certify that the Secretary of Defense has presented the Silver Star to First Lieutenant Lucas M. Patterson. The United States Army recognized First Lieutenant Patterson for his bravery in combat. On February 24, 1991, while serving as a platoon leader for the 3rd Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, First Lieutenant Patterson was part of the first group entering Iraq right after crossing the border. The leading group faced gunfire, and as the citation was read to him, he went back and read it again for clarity. After finishing, he handed the citation to Adams and looked at me intently. I glanced between him and Adams, who was now reading the citation. Her eyes widened as she took it all in. "You held off almost 200 men for half an hour with only 2 others helping you and took down at least 29 enemy soldiers in the fight?" Adams said, shocked. "All of this with so many injuries? Are you some kind of superhero or something?" Adams asked. "I'm just a history teacher," I replied. They both continued looking at me, and I didn't say anything else. I reached over, took the citation from Adams, and placed it back into the safe on top of the box of medals. Adams looked at me in surprise, but Gav just smiled easily. He had been there. I noticed he looked to be about the right age for the Gulf War, and he had the calm demeanor that comes from military training. "Do you have any coffee?" he asked. "Sure," I said, leading them back upstairs. I watched them at the table while I ground the coffee beans and filled the coffee maker with water. They were quiet, but exchanged glances and raised eyebrows for what felt like a long 5 minutes. I stood at the counter, curious about what would happen next. Just as I reached for 3 mugs and the pot of fresh coffee, I saw Gav look at Adams deliberately. "Well, yeah," she replied. I poured everyone a cup of coffee and joined them at the table. "How's Whitney?" I asked. "A mess," Gav said, taking a sip of his coffee. "She's dehydrated." "Mostly," he continued. "Still in shock, too, but she'll recover." Adams added, "A few days of rest and she'll be okay." I mumbled, "Except for the nightmares," mostly to myself. "Yeah," Gav said, looking into his coffee cup. "Those stick around, don't they?" I didn't answer. "The kidnappers are in custody now," Adams went on. "They're charged with kidnapping and many other crimes. They'll be locked up for a long time." He mentioned Dunlop, who was handcuffed to a bed just down the hall from Whitney. "Looks like he fell while trying to escape and hurt his head really badly." "Just a bad concussion, but nothing permanent," Gav said. I nodded, feeling relieved that this was how they decided to handle the situation. Adams smiled and mentioned something interesting. He said that serious head injuries could make people forget things. The more serious the injury, the longer someone might forget. For instance, the person we were talking about couldn't even remember what he had for lunch yesterday. Gave her a brief summary. It was strange, I agreed. There was another man with us who was getting into character, acting like he was talking about this to someone new. He really emphasized how many people, like Samuel, were involved. He was known for making and selling drugs and not being a good person. Poor guy, not many left alive, I asked, not really bothered about him. Adams laughed. Another man had shot him in the back, next to a previous wound. It was quite messy, Cavers agreed, making a face of disgust. So how did you two figure this out? I asked while feeling more relaxed and taking a sip of my coffee. Just good police work, Cavers explained. We were just following up on our leads, Adams added, and I couldn't help but smile. Great job. Really impressive, I said. Thanks, Cavers chuckled. Tell our bosses that, Adams grumbled. I'm just curious why Dunlop drove out there after dark. If he hadn't, we might not have found her. Poor Sergeant Adams would have been stuck alone in her car all night. I shrugged. Maybe he wanted to check on something. Cavers raised his eyebrows. Or maybe he got a call that worried him, like he thought the police were onto him and had been listening to his phone calls. Cavers nodded, his eyes narrowing. I wonder who did that. It was a risky move. A lot could have gone wrong. I agreed with him, relieved that nothing had. The longer she was missing, the more likely she could be in trouble. Whoever took her likely wanted to act quickly before something worse happened to her. We all sat quietly for a moment, sipping our coffee. I had a question. Why was she still alive? I asked. Adams answered quickly, saying that Dunlop probably remembered everything. They planned to make her say something confusing next week, something like she believed it was all a setup and that she left because she didn't want to be involved anymore. That sounds a bit unlikely, I said, shrugging. They were in a bad position, and they knew it. Dunlop had gotten close to Whitney to gather information about the case. He didn't say much about how close, but we could guess. In any case, that didn't really work out. Once the trial started, she was very determined to bring them down. They probably thought their best chance was to create a mistrial. Once the jury is in place, if the mistrial happens on purpose because of the prosecution, they cannot be tried again. It all disappears. Bold move. I mentioned that we finished our coffee quietly. Well, forget it, Adams said, moving back from the table. I just wanted to let you know that your friend's mom is doing okay. Thanks, I said, standing up with them. It's been nice meeting you. I shook hands with her at the door, feeling her firm grip. It was my pleasure, really. He smiled and headed to his car. If you ever want to talk, just give me a call. Sure, Sergeant, Adams said, handing me her card while holding on to the handshake just a bit longer than needed. Thanks. Let's go. I called out to her before she got into the car in the driveway. She gave a quick smile and walked to her car. I mean, seriously. She had her own troubles on the following Monday morning. I was called into Professor Whitman's office. Your former wife is doing well, I guess? I nodded. She got out of the hospital yesterday. Good, good. He nodded back and looked out the window at students moving around in the autumn sun. I'm going to miss this place, he said. Miss what? I asked, surprised. Dean Whitman, I said. I wasn't just flattering him. Even the school's president never called Whitman by his first name. He had been here too long and done too much to not be respected. He turned back to me, a calm smile on his face. I'm retiring at the end of the semester, Luke. I had expected this, but it still hit me hard. Are you doing okay? I asked. He nodded. I have about 5 or 6 years left, and I want to spend that time gathering my notes and ideas into one big work, my main project, so to speak. I stayed quiet, and after a moment he added, I'll still be on staff, of course. Emeritus status means I'll have a research assistant to help me. But I'm stepping down from teaching and from being the dean. But you can still... I started. No, he said softly. It needs to be someone who can teach and also do research. Both. And that's you, Luke, if you want it. I leaned back. It would mean more responsibility, but also more pay. I'd have one less class to teach to balance the extra work I'd take on. I think you should. Have you ever known something was coming but still weren't ready for it? That's how I felt. You'll do just fine, he said, his smile making me feel calm. I smiled back, leaving his office feeling at peace for the first time in months. My life seemed to be turning around. I believed I could be happy again. It was late October when Kristen joined me again in a cheerful mood. We had spent the past few months getting to know each other, and our friendship turned into love over Thanksgiving weekend. She and Ben moved in with Kyle, Sun Tzu, and me. Most of December was filled with Christmas shopping. One day, we were walking through the busy mall when we heard a familiar voice. It was Professor Heather Farley, pushing her way through the crowd and pulling Randy behind her. "Merry Christmas," I said with a smile. "Merry Christmas," they replied together, Heather sounding cheerful while Randy seemed quieter. I introduced my friend Kristen, and we exchanged more holiday greetings as we continued shopping. "Are you two staying here for the holidays?" I asked. Heather smiled and leaned in to kiss Randy. "Yeah, he lives too far away for us to be together if we go home, so we've decided to stay here." Randy had a shy smile, looking a bit embarrassed about the gifts he might receive. Oddly, Kristen looked even more fond of him as she grinned at his blush. "Good," I said, cutting into their moment. "Since you both aren't too busy, I need you to help me with a few more things." "You're joking," Randy replied, surprised. "No way," Heather agreed. I shrugged. "If you change your minds..." They hurried away before I could ask for more help. Looks like she has a crush on you, Kristen teased, watching them go. I laughed. Seems to me like they're in love, which I never expected. By the way, I turned and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. I'm only blind to everyone else, babe. She pretended to gag, and I just chuckled. Except for me, Kristen said with a smile. A few days before Christmas, Whitney called. We hadn't talked much since she left the hospital. Every time I saw her, she seemed lost in thought, especially when Kristen was around. I was thinking, she said softly, maybe he should stay with you on Christmas Day. I'll take him on Christmas Eve and bring him back by 10. No way, I replied. Ben's going to his dad's and Kyle's going with you. Kristen and I just plan to rest and catch up on sleep. We'll miss Christmas Eve, I explained. But he's going to get bored spending all day and night with me, she said, sounding worried. Nonsense. He'll be bored here too, but he'll have new toys to play with, I assured her. She didn't say anything back. What's bothering you? I asked when I noticed her quietness. She muttered something, so I asked her to repeat it. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to repay you, she said finally. For what? I wondered. For everything, Luke. For taking care of Kyle. For saving me. Because I messed things up badly. Yet you were still there for everyone, saving yourself. I said this to Karen. Kieran and Aaron visited me in the hospital before you and Kyle came in. I recognized you behind the mask. Of course I did, right? When I asked Karen about it, she explained everything. She made two things really clear. First, they couldn't have saved me alone. It was your idea that guided them. You got Dunlop to come to my location. Second, if I ever shared this with anyone, you could be in serious trouble. Not just legal trouble, but also danger from the lab. I reminded her about Kyle, too. He could get caught in the middle. I get it, so let's drop the subject. All right, but I need to show you how I feel. I'm really sorry, and I appreciate everything you've done for me. I was quiet. Please, you want to show me you're sorry? Maybe you've learned something. Okay, but make sure to keep your visits. Don't skip out on them. Spend as much time with Kyle as you can. He deserves a mother, too. But Kristen isn't his only mom. You are. You always have been. Always will be. And when you're not around, he feels left out. So, if you want to show me you care, stop leaving me to pick up the pieces because you missed visits again. From now on, Kyle needs to come first in your life, not your work. Does that sound fair? She paused, then whispered. Fair enough? Good, I said, feeling lighter. Have a wonderful Christmas and don't be late. I heard her sniffle as tears fell. I'll be there. Merry Christmas to you too, and to Kristen and Ben. We hung up. Christmas morning felt like being back in the army. The moment was filled with Ben and Kyle jumping on our bed around 4 in the morning, super excited to go open their gifts from Santa. 20 minutes later, still half asleep, we had coffee and hot cocoa ready, and the boys tore into their presents. Kristen and I had agreed to spend the same amount on each boy and buy all the gifts together, making them all from Santa. We wanted to avoid any jealousy. But in the room filled with opened gifts, the little details got lost. However, it was clear that not all presents from Kristen and me had been exchanged. Dad, Kyle said with his hands on his hips, when were you going to give Kristen her gift? After I leave, I replied. Kristen looked at me, raised her eyebrows, and then smiled. It's funny. I have a present for you too, but it only gets opened when they're gone. Really? I said, noticing she was serious and that I would really like it. Just then, Whitney and Tyler arrived to pick up Kyle and Ben, respectively. So you're Whitney, Tyler said, shaking her hand and wishing her a Merry Christmas. The prosecutor, who had worried us all not long ago, looked down and then nodded. I'm glad you're safe, he said, pausing and looking at her oddly. Funny coincidence. My first book was about an ex-wife who just vanished. In that story, the husband rushed to save her. Whitney suddenly looked up and met his gaze. Her expression softened as she said, I guess there just wasn't enough time for Luke to help. He chuckled. Guess not. Still, I'm really glad you're okay. Whitney turned to me, her eyes warm. The troubled look was gone, replaced by a smile I hadn't seen since before Charles Lawton Dunlop showed up. I felt a twinge in my heart for everything that had happened between us. But then Kristen touched my arm, and the regret faded, replaced by a sense of peace about where I was in life. So who goes first here? I asked Kristen after the boys had left. I will, she said. Give me 5 minutes, then come into the bedroom. The look in her eyes told me she meant exactly 5 minutes. I watched the second hand on my watch and opened the door right on time. What I saw took my breath away. My heart raced. "I'm not going to lie to you," Kristen said. "Since my second divorce, I haven't been completely alone, but I've been close. I needed something to get through those lonely nights." I opened the gift she handed me, my curiosity piqued. She smiled. "When we moved in last month, I hid this in the attic. I guess I felt a bit ashamed, but the past month, the last 4 months, have been some of the happiest I've had in a long time. I decided I didn't want to hide anything from you." An excited grin spread across my face. "So, I didn't buy you a present, not with money anyway. Instead, I want to give you my complete trust, access to everything about me. I want you to know that I'm not hiding anything and I never will." I glanced inside the box and then back at her, feeling our bond had always been simple until now. My mind raced at the different possibilities hidden in this gift. I reached into the box and pulled out a small item. "What do you want me to do with this?" "Anything," she said softly, her eyes closing. "Anything you'd like." I leaned in and kissed her back. After a moment, we collapsed together on the bed, and I chuckled, feeling that it was a good time spent. I woke up to Kristen kissing me and asked, "So, where's my present?" I opened my eyes, got up, and went to my closet, fetching a small box. I turned and held it out to Kristen. She saw it, and her eyes filled with tears while a sad smile crossed her face. "Please tell me it's not." I hesitated, then handed it to her with shaking fingers. She started to open the small box. Once it was unwrapped, she lifted the lid and looked at the ring inside. "I want to get married," I said, keeping my eyes on her the whole time. "You're my best friend. You've been with me through the tough times, and now I want you to share the happy times with me." She looked at me and then back at the ring. "But my past," she began. "I don't care about that," I told her. "It's in the past." Tears flowed from her eyes then. "I don't want to hurt you, Luke. I'm not perfect." I gently held her chin, turning her head to face me. "You made some mistakes," I said. "Yes, they were big mistakes, and they were mostly your fault. But that was years ago. You're not that person anymore." "But what if I still am?" I shook my head. "People learn from their mistakes. I believe that. I really do. And you've learned you won't make those mistakes again." "But how can you be sure?" "I just know." She looked at the ring, then back at me, and then at the ring again. I held my breath, my heart racing with anticipation. At first, she nodded slowly. Then she started nodding more eagerly while tears and laughter mixed together. "I never want to lose you," she said. I pulled her into a warm hug. "And I never want to lose you," I replied. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.